Oh, yeah. Kuma. Yahweh. We are here to avoid the real man. We are used to be the real man. I want to take from you. Oh, Yahweh. The enemy be dead. Those that need to be from before the thanks for saying hallelujah.
Shalom, shalom, family, shalom. So welcome to Into All Truth. Welcome, family. And this is Rachel, Sister Rachel, just welcoming you to it's the eve of Shabbat. Welcome, Hazel, Eugene, and Charlon. And welcome people on TikTok and YouTube. So I'm going to start broadcasting the next word we have on the fourth Carpenters. We're reviewing the four Carpenters all over again, fam. And so let me just take down this promo and we're going to get into the fourth Carpenter here. Russia, that's not actually necessarily the order. The fourth Carpenter was really probably the Gentiles and the Africans, because the Black Arabs sold everyone into slavery and worked together with the Gentiles from Britain as well as other nations in Europe. So, but let's just get into this, family, and yeah. Just want to make sure I've got the right movies. Okay, I think this is it. I hope it is. I just pray that Yahuwah will lead us into all truth and show us things to come. And we just lift up our voices to Yahuwah. I ask for assistance with any technical issues and that you surround us with your hedge of protection. All right, so, okay. All right, I gotta try the screen share again. There we go, that's working now. All right, I hope everyone's doing okay and Yahuwah protect us. Guard our hearts, and may the seed of your word be sown in our hearts. And you give us a spirit of wisdom, revelation, and knowledge in the Ruach HaKodesh. Lead us into all truth, seal out and bind the enemy, and be a hedge of protection all around us. In Yahushua's name I pray. Amen. Let's go. Let's get into it, family. So this is going to be a deep one, as usual. So get ready for it. 17 U.S.C. 107 federal law allows citizens to use copyrighted media for fair use. That is criticism, news reporting, teaching, and parody.
Kuma. Yahweh. We are put to America. We are new to America. Arise of you, O Yahweh. Kuma. Let your enemies be scattered, and let those that hate thee flee from before thee. Let all of Yasharah, Yisrael, who love, worship, and praise Yahweh, give him thanks by saying hallelujah.
Shalom, everyone, and welcome to Into All Truth. My name is Rachel. We welcome donations, and we thank you, everyone, for donations that you made for calendars and cookbooks. Make a donation of $35 or more at livelightwell.com, and you'll get both the calendar and the Hebraic lifestyle Chaya Eat Life and Fast book. And I pray that as you listen to this study, that the Ruach HaKodesh will lead you into all truth and show you things to come. Baruch atah kulam, in the name of Yahushua HaMashiach.
Jacob's troubles will soon be over. Yeshua in all his power and glory, the King will soon return. Jacob's troubles, the red dragon scattered Yahuwah's people. Israelites' bones have been plundered from nation to nation.
None seeketh after Israel. So this is the time of Jacob's trouble. And remember, Israel is a woman. Israel is a woman. Okay? And none seeketh after her to protect her. Right? The sisters. Not so true anymore. Slowly changing. And there appeared another wonder in heaven, for behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns upon his head, and his tail drew the 3rd part of the stars of heaven, and cast them to the earth. And the dragon was wroth with the woman, and went to make war with the remnant of her seed. We are about to dig in for a second time to Russia as a carpenter who doth seeketh after Israel, but to sharpen her for its own hands. And now with this, we're going to be tying the Crimean War of Russia, the crime of the ages, into all of the wars that Israel was fighting, and into the fall of Japheth's power is kind of what I'm seeing as sort of my theory at this point, and the rise of the empire of the fallen angels, the final hour of the beast. And so we're going to see what kind of role Russia played in that, in assisting the woman and warring against her eventually, and how Russia becomes part of the open door and the return of Israel to the promised land. The reason why I wanted to do this video is because I've explored these scriptures on the invasion of the promised land and how it goes about. And there's a prophecy of how it takes place. In addition to that, there's also the prophecy of 4 carpenters repatriating Israel to their land. So the 4 carpenters, Zechariah 2. And I lifted up my eyes and looked, and behold, 4 horns. And I said to the angel that spoke with me, what are these, my Lord? And he said to me, these are the horns that have scattered Judah and Israel and Jerusalem. And the Lord showed me 4 artificers. And I said, what are these coming to do? And he said, these are the horns that scattered Judah, and they broke Israel into pieces, and none of them lifted up his head. And these are come forth to sharpen them for their hands, even the 4 horns, the nations that lifted up the horn against the land of Yahuwah to scatter it. And I lifted up my eyes, and I looked, and behold, a man in his hand with a measuring line. And I said to him, whither goest thou? And he said to me, to measure Jerusalem, to see what is the breadth of it, and what is the length of it. And behold, the angel that spoke with me stood by, and another angel went forth to meet him, and spoke to him, saying, run and speak to that man, saying, Jerusalem shall be fully inhabited by the reason of the abundance of men and cattle in the midst of her. And I will be to her, saith Yahuwah, a wall of fire round about, and I will be for a glory in the midst of her. Hallelujah. So you guys, that is the promise of the end of the scattering, the final regathering. An artificer is a skilled worker, a craftsperson, one that contrives, devises, or constructs something a deceptive or devious person. So we often hear that these are the four carpenters. And so this is who they are: Africa, Iran, Russia, and China. So we already talked about the Medo-Persians and we talked about Africa. And for those of you dealing with Africa, I have to, do a lot more justice to Africa, because I have to talk about the Midianites and the other nations there who are on the side of Israel and assisting Israel. So I am going to go into that, as well as with the world wars. So I may just combine that all together. But we've generally just gone over those who were the captors of Israel was the focus, okay? And we've already gone into, of course, the Medo-Persians, which includes Assyria and India, the descendants of Shem, and Shem mixed with Japheth. And so now we're going to go into Russia. Tartaria, Gog and Magog, okay? And so these are the nations that we're going to find both scattered Israel, and these are also the nations that are coming to what does it say? That come forth to sharpen them for their hand. By the same token, Russia is positioning itself to do exactly the same thing, because it has the largest portion of the Ish people, and it's very supportive of the Ish people. So same thing, sharpen them for their hands, usurp the identity, same agenda from Japheth as is coming from Esau, Edom, and Ham. All right, family, so just an addendum to this, last year when I did this video, family, Russia, we're going to cover how they were supporting the Ish people. But now, they've seemed to have changed their tune and actually flipped the script, literally. Because who did they kick out of the AU? It wasn't just them. It wasn't just the AU that did it. It was Russia kicking the Ish people out of the AU gathering. But we're going to look at some of their history with the Ish people, because a lot of people in Russia are related to the Ish people. And if you know. I can't really explain it to you beyond that, who the Ish people are. Keep in mind, the devil has players on both sides of the chessboard, both black and white players. And that's what this is all about. It's all about being a player for Yah in this end game. All right, Arthur Koestler's 13th tribe, continuing. There's an ancient tradition among the Germanics, and they would go and get the Sabian women, and they would go and get the Jewish women. And according to this tradition, a German unit, the Varangiani, who fought with the Roman legions in Palestine, had chosen from the vast horde of Jewish prisoners the most beautiful women, and had brought them back to their stations on the shores of the Rhine and the Main, and had compelled them to minister to the satisfaction of their desires. The children thus begotten of the Jewish and German parents were brought up by their mothers in the Jewish faith, their fathers not troubling themselves about them. It is these children who are said to have been the founders of the first Jewish communities between Worms and Mayence. Okay, so that's from the 13th tribe. So don't forget, just remember, whoever has the woman has the land. Whoever gets the daughter of Israel gets title to the land. Levi, Simeon, and Judah knew this. Abraham was scared to confront the Egyptians. So was Isaac. So was Jacob when it came to Dinah and Shechem. But Yah made Levi priest because he fought for Dinah. Simeon was exalted also for that reason, and Judah, all three of them. So because of Simeon's bitterness against Joseph, though, he fell. But that's why Judah and Levi are at the top, because they understand the value of the woman. Levi married a Levitical daughter, a daughter of Haran, had no issues, had one wife. Judah married a Canaanite, learned his lesson, got his sons a priest's daughter, and then all his sons died who were married to her. And then he accidentally slept with her, but she redeemed the line back to Yehuda, back to Israel. But he recognized. Okay, family. So that is just talking about how Judah married a Canaanite woman, then realized his mistake, and so brought for his sons a daughter again of Shem for a wife. And the Canaanite woman told them all to spill their seed. So Yah killed them. And then that is Tamar. And she eventually got the signet from Yehuda after mixing with him, because he refused to give her his youngest son to raise up seed. Okay, so the mother of Dawid and the line of Yehuda is Tamar, who was from I believe the tribe of Aram. Okay, one of the Shemitic tribes. All right, so the king and the priest, the wife of the king and the priest, Levi and Yehuda, of that bloodline, is a Shemitic woman. Make no mistake about it. That he mistook a rich woman for a queen in the Canaanite, and he mistook his daughter for a prostitute. So he realized he didn't know how to choose a good woman. So he just abstained. So praise Yah for the men of Israel who seek to redeem the women of Israel. So yeah, after that, Judah never got another wife, because Tamar had to trick him and pretend she was a prostitute, because she knew that he was bent that way. And so that's the grandmother of Dawid. All right. And keep in mind, family, also that Ruth was a Reubenite. She was not a Moabite. She was a descendant of the tribe of Reuben. And I've got to do a study on that. The Israel had already taken over those lands. They had driven out the Amorites and the Moabites, and Reuben was residing there at the time that she married into the line of Dawid. Okay? And the land, and have not mistaken the queen and priest for a prostitute. So we're going to get more into these white and black bloodlines of the Russians in part 2 of this, which I'll post later on this week. It's just gotten to be really long. And of course, I'll go into the Belarus, the white Russians, the Ukrainians, who are the Polish, the Ashkenazis, the Ukrainians. They're all the same people, exact same genetics, everything. So I want to start with a little bit of history on the Khazars, and that is because the Rothschilds are related to them. And so I'm going to try and sum this up quickly. This was in a recent video that went around on YouTube for a lot of people, from a Christian person of color, but I don't necessarily agree with everything he said, but it was a good source of some information. So anyway, speaking of the Rothschilds, because they tie into all of this, they're one of the 1% leading families, and they were descended from the Bacharach family, the suffix of that being Iraq. They were from Iraq, the moon city of the Babylonians, okay? And they changed their name to Sassoon, like the Sassanians. You see this brother in the background on the right, he is a Sassanian, and you see he's got that kind of large forehead. So the Rothschilds also changed their name to Aziza and eventually to Rothschilds. But anyway, they control the global drug trade, and they're ranked number 7th by Interpol in terms of that. And their history is that they converted to Judaism, and Leo of the Khazar, the father of the Khazarians, plundered the temple and took the scroll and converted to Judaism. So my question is, if the grandfather of the Rothschilds has the actual scroll from the temple, why don't they cross-check the Dead Sea Scrolls against that and see if it's the same script and see if it says the same thing as the Talmud? Because he's got it, so they can just go and check that way. They don't need to do anything else. They don't need to go anywhere else. Okay, so we're going to go back to the Rothschilds a little later down the line. I just want to go back into a lot of history relating to the time of Rus and who the Russians and Khazars are. more of that bloodline. So we'll come back to this, but I just want to go into a little bit of history that we already covered. However, it's adding to that. And as I said, they're connected to the Sassoon bloodline. And at that point, they traveled to India and began the global drug trade and trafficking. So they got control of the opium trade, and that enabled them to control the world. In 1972, they migrated from Iraq, Baghdad to India and set up the Golden Triangle, okay? The cocaine triangle and opium drug trade. They call themselves crypto Jews, all right, but privately they're Egyptians, Moroccans, Mongolians, and Turkish, and they're Horites from Mount Seir. And they also link to the Arabs. So crypto means that they outwardly say they're Jews or Arabs, and then inwardly they're worshiping these other gods, Babylonian gods. They are related to Amalek. I'm just kind of summing this up. I'm not reading it straight through. Take a screenshot if you want to. They then set up the House of Saud in Saudi Arabia. Mohammed bin Salman set it up. And then they masqueraded as Muslims, all right? But in reality, they were domain Jews, okay? So that means, and they practiced sorcery. So that's Babylonianism. Set up the House of Saud in order to take over the oil market and supply in Saudi Arabia. And that's what the movie Lawrence of Arabia is all about. So domain Jews means that they were Zionists. That means they believed in the state of Israel, but not the nation. The people are the nation of Israel, okay? But Zionism is not spiritually based on the word. It is a state that is created and designed. So we know the true nation of Israel is those who came on slave ships. So once again, the Rothschilds are ranked 7 with Interpol for the drug trade. Why? Because in the 1850s, Rockefeller colonized India, and Rothschild's Sassoon family got the monopoly rights over the opium trade, which they used to destroy the Qing dynasty, the Cain dynasty. So Xi Jinping, the leader of China, is a descendant. Remember, if you see in the notes at the beginning, they say they're descended from the dragon people. Now, all right, family. So that's very significant because that is who is running the world right now. Am I right? So that is the China that's running the world. And of course, we have to review, family, what is the curse? What is the curse against Canaan? What is the curse against Canaan? And Canaan shall be a servant. A servant will serve his brother. So he's going to serve Japheth and Shem. A servant of servants shall he be. All right. So right now, see, China went through a terrible transition because they knew Israel was the world power. And this is why they say, may you live in changing times, right? Because they went through that transition and they were overcome by these Rothschild families, right? And so consequently, since they were overcome and they were overcome with drugs and the opiate trade, right? And these are other families who run things like the Horites, for example, are associated with the Rothschilds, okay? So the Horites run America right now. And so there's kind of a reversal in the opioid warfare right now, isn't there, with the fentanyl thing, right? And so we see history repeating and reversing because the power structure, sorry, fam, I have this up as the power structure is switching. The power structure is switching. This is why the Chinese say one more time, may you live in changing times, because they didn't know what was going on at the time. Mind you, though, they had already done their Mongolian horde takeovers and all of that sort of thing. They started to mix in with all of the Ethiopians and the Shemites and everything. And now this is when these other groups started to take over. So I want you to just remember that. Remember who these people are. We're tracking the genealogies and the switch, the reset and the power exchange. So keep that in mind. We are tracking the power exchange. We're focusing on Russia. But notice that. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that an interesting point? Okay, that Xiao Jinping was sorry, I didn't get his last name right. Again, fam, I'm kind of fasting, so I'm really spacey. But it was his family's dynasty that was taken down with the opioid trade, which was how they financed their world takeover. Okay, these Rothschild families. Ironic, right? All right, let's keep it moving. How king sounds like king, right? The term, a Canaan term for a leader, Khan or king. Canaan is not allowed to be grafted in scripture, nor is the fallen seeds of the Horites. However, after Yahusha, he does allow the Canaanites to become grafted in. All right, the Ukraine and the Rothschilds own 85% of human trafficking. So these Iraqi Moon City people who are perpetrating as Hebrews and Jews used to build underground tunnels to traffic children through. And they were known as Madzuk. That's like Marduk, Babylon. And they are connected to Genghis Khan and Vlad the Impaler. All right, family. So did you see today, for those of you, I'll post it on my YouTube channel, but for those of you, family, who watched the TikTok executives' interrogation by Congress today, was very interesting because who was the last person to show up? Marduk. Okay, we just mentioned this is Marduk, this is Satan's children, and this is the guy with one eye. So who was the last person that this guy saw from Congress? Chu saw. He saw the man, the Marduk man, with an eye patch on, with one eye poked out. Okay, that's Marduk, that's Babylon. So that was a sign to him. Okay, it was these people who destroyed Xiao Jinping's, I keep getting his name wrong, family's dynasty. Now he is ruling. And so this was a signal back to him. You see what I'm saying? You understand? Family, there's a lot more going on. This is why you have to watch all the symbolism, read between the lines. If you know, you know, and I'll try to teach you what I can, family, but let's keep it moving. Vlad the Impaler. So that is Dracula. Okay, so they're related to Vlad the Impaler. All right, Dracula. All right, and he's the father of the draconian system, which used to impale and eat children. Christopher Columbus was a Khazarian. Remember I said the Batu was ruler of the Huns? That's who they are, the Batu again. Okay, and the Scythian bloodline is their bloodline too. Okay, so the Scythians, and you can see up in the top right-hand corner as the Scyths, the Sake. So this is relating to sons of Isaac and Esau, and the Scythians. They are, see it says Ish Kuzay or Ashkenazi. Okay, so there's actually, so Ish means wife or married to Kuzay. And they're an ancient nomadic people living primarily in the region, this is in the top right corner of the slide here, known as Scythia, which today comprises the Eurasian steppes of Kazakhstan, okay, and the Ukraine, Volga, and the Siberian areas, okay? All right, so their bloodline is of Vlad the Impaler The Bantu ruled the Hun dynasty, and they used to practice this spirit cooking where you see, remember they were doing that in Hollywood a while back. Miss Abramovich woman, I don't know if I'm pronouncing her name properly, on the top of the slide there, all her spirit cooking, okay? And so this comes from the Ukrainians in Kiev, according to the Khazarian hypothesis. It goes back to a 6,000-year-old ritual, 6,000 BC, of spirit cooking. And it used to take place in Kiev, which is the name of one of their goddesses. All right, which deals with the transference of curses. Kiev was once part of Russia, and Kiev is part of the Ukraine, so that you understand exactly what this means. These people would do these rituals in line with the new moon. The sickle is the shape of a new moon. So these curses were dispatched and transferred at the new moon. And Zechariah proves, I turned and lifted up my eyes and looked, and behold, a flying sickle. And he said to me, what seest thou? And I said, a flying sickle, of the length of 20 cubits, and of the breadth of 10 cubits. And he said to me, this is the curse that goes forth over the face of the whole earth. So this is how they dispatch these curses on the new moon. So if you're trying to line yourself up with a profane day and disobey the law, line up all your holy days with the new moon so that you can, catch these curses. So these Russian chronicles. So family, you know how I am about the moon, okay? So if that's not another conclusive piece of evidence, I don't even have that in the calendar, but I got to put it in. Because the curse that is sent out over the whole earth, which lines up with the two women in the basket that set up Babylon in its place, Diana and the Statue of Liberty, who now hold either end of America together right now, Diana in San Francisco and the Statue of Liberty in New York. San Francisco is the capital of the Satanic Society, okay? And also all the internet. And then, of course, New York is the new moon capital, all right? So they would dispatch these curses using a sickle, which is a symbol of death and the new moon, all right? Let's keep it moving. All right, so now we're going to talk about the chronicles, the Nestor chronicles in Russia. See how the Russians were dark-skinned people. You see them on the right. Now, this is all the people who came up from the sea after the flood. But over here on the right, we have a Negro-looking Japheth, okay? Tend to rewrite the Bible a bit. And of course, they start with the flood. And why? Because the enemy comes in like a flood. But we're going to deal with this other chronicle here. So this Russian primary chronicle that I'm going to use really does some interesting things. And one of the things they do is, of course, they rewrite history, they rewrite the Bible, the flood, boundaries, all of that kind of thing. But so it's really interesting, though, what they say about the land of Japheth and who the people are. And then we're going to get more in depth with the truth of that. So here's the land of Japheth. The land of Japheth. The share of Japheth lies Rus. In the share of Japheth lies Rus, Hud, and all the Gentiles. So it goes into them. All right. And so then it says the names of them, the Lacans, the Prussians, the Chud border on the Varangian Sea. The Varangians dwell on the shores of that same sea and extend eastward as far as the portion of Shem. They likewise live to the west beside the sea as the land of the English and the French. For the following nations are part of the race of Japheth: the Varangians, the Swedes, the Normans, the Godanders, the Russes, the English, the Spaniards, Italians, Romans, Germans, French, Phoenicians, Genoese, and their homes are situated in the northwest and adjoin the Hamitic tribes. Notice how Russia, okay, they're saying in this chronicle that the land of Shem is east of them, east of Russia. See what I told you? This is one of the things that the Rothschilds did, that these families did, was they reestablished, they changed east and west. So they've been calling China east, but in fact, as I said, and according to the book of Jubilees, as I've read to you many times, Africa is the east and the south, both. So you notice it says eastward as far as the portion of Shem. So Africa is east. They lie about the borders, and they set up the East India and West India Company to change east and west. Okay, let's keep it moving. See, they add themselves to his genealogy. Fallen angels add themselves to Japheth's genealogy, and we're going to see that. You know, we already talked about the Khazarian conversion in the last episode, and so we talked a little bit more about it here. And then a little further down, as we said before, there was this time of the transition from the Ivanov or Japheth Empire, and even some of the Israelites were still in that area, over to the Khazar Empire. And so what I'd like to just discuss with you is there being a kind of community of Israelites there, even still possibly, because there is an Ephraim who is a sort of a bishop over that region. And he is also called John of Kiev, like a Prester John. Now, this could be Esau imitating the bloodline, or it could actually be Ephraim. Okay? So, Ephraim in Russia and Kiev. All right, so around 1089, mention is made of a metropolitan Ephraim in Paris-Saval, which is striking in view of the fact that the metropolitan John of Kiev is mentioned as dying the same year and is being replaced by a successor of the same name brought from Constantinople. Okay, so, and Ewan would imply Lamb, or Ewan Norris would be Nor or Nors. So Northern Nors or Nors like Noir So black ram or lamb, or northern ram or lamb. Okay, this is just what I'm kind of figuring. So here's a little bit more evidence to this. And this resource is coming out of the Russian Primary Chronicle. Okay, so that's coming out of the Russian Primary Chronicle. A little bit of a struggle to read it. It's kind of sketchy because it's translated. There's a Joachim here, which is, there was a Jehoiakim in the tribe of Ephraim and Manasseh, okay, in scripture. So we don't know if this is them trying to imitate or what. But it said that he died in 1030 and designated as his successor as pupil Ephraim. Okay. But then some wealthy guy named Yaroslav disregarded Joachim's wishes and finally in 1036 appointed Luca a Khazarian Jew. So this is the beginning of the invasion of the Khazarians, to see which he held. So the see is the Holy See, which he held for 19 years. Keep in mind, this is the Orthodox Coptic or Christian church, okay? In 1099, however, after the death of his patron, Yaroslav Luka was accused of improper conduct, summoned to Kiev by the metropolitan Ephraim, deprived of his see and thrown in prison, and he lay there for 3 years. So this is the possible Ephraim that there was there, and this is the Khazarian Jews taking over this priestly office in this time, the 1000s, 11th century. Okay, that's why I'm mentioning it. And so we mentioned before, after that, there was the Huns invaded, and that this was about approximately 150 years later, and there was a Prester in position there in Chernigov, and he resisted the Khan and the Khazarians, okay, Khazarians, who ruled the Mongolian Empire, and so he was slain by the Hun for not submitting to the Khan, okay, so there he is with all the other black icons, right? Could be Esau, could be Jacob, could be black Japheth, or any combination thereof. This is really interesting. All right, so Sar is a word used by the Somalians for a celebration they have, which means to cut off, to cut away, cut you off from being a nation. Septimus Severus, all right? And angel or Angian means angel seed of the earth, right? So the Romans, this is some history on who these people are. Okay, now remember, Japheth is the Celts, the black Celts. They're not from Chaldea. They did go over there, but they're originally from North America, Japheth's land. The Celtic mountains are here. All right? But what does it say? The original people of Britain and Western Europe were brown-skinned and dark. This is often conflated with the Celts or cults of Japheth, who found themselves there from North America and then mixed in identities. Japheth got the land of the Celts, according to Jubilees. It extends northerly to the north and extends to the mountains of Kelp towards the north, towards the Sea of Ma'uk, and it goes forth to the east of Gadir, Niagara Falls, before destroyed, as far as the region of the waters of the sea. So Celt would be the northern mountains, because Ma'uk would be this area here. Okay?
So
So these are the northern mountains.
Very
These
cropping.
mountains are called Celtic mountains. Celtic Peak, Celtic NE4. These are Celtic mountains. Okay? This is Japheth's land.
Rocky Mountains.
All right. So let's go back to this
Native
history.
Rockies.
So, the Romans adopted the name Germani for the Teutonic tribes from the Celts with whom they came in contact. So, the Teutonic are the Deuteronomy tribes. These are the tribes who I believe were descended from the Northern Kingdom. They were the Teutonic Knights, okay? And they had mixed in with Japheth and into the Celts, all right? And other people mixed in. So the Romans started calling these people, whatever they became after all these iterations, Germanes. Because remember, Israel, Israel was changing their name all the time because they were a byword everywhere they went. So they said, oh, we're Israel. Then they said, oh, we're Yehudi. Oh, we're Moors. Oh, we're Negroes. Now we're colored, byword. All right? And then anyone who stole their identity would just steal those identities. The interpretation of the original significance of the term Rus is to some extent complicated by its association with the name Varangian. Varangian. Okay, so V is W, right? Varangian, war angels. As already intimated, Varangian is used in earlier sections of the prose. This is, I guess, some book of history, as a generic term for the Germanic nations on the coast of the Baltic, including the Swedes, Gotlanders, English, and Russes. On the other hand, the prose in 4 passages specifically refers to the Varangians as from beyond the sea. Dead things come up from out of the sea. They come from beyond the sea. And it may be concluded that those Varangians who migrated to Russia were regarded as exclusively Scandinavian. Okay? So angels. Okay, so remember, family, if you watch my video on the Canaanites, the Scandinavians tended to be associated with the Amorites and sometimes the Philistines, even sometimes. Okay. So this Arabic geographer Al-Bruni also mentioned the Baltic Sea as the Varangian Sea and specifies the Varangians as people dwelling on its coast. So they dwell on the coast. And so the Arabs said these Varangians were the Swedes. All right. The term Varangian was not known in Russia before the last half of the 10th century, when it came into use there as applied to the Scandinavian warriors who took service from the Russian princes or Byzantine emperors and distinguished the latter from the old line of Scandinavian colonists who by 1000 must have been well Russified. Not crucified, Russified. So these Scandinavians come in and take over this Russian identity, become Russified, and they are descendants of the warring angels. Okay? Varangians. This is Russian Primary Chronicle. Okay, more on them. The Varangians. This was a name given by the Eastern Romans to Viking raiders. Now, the Vikings were originally Celtic and black, but again, identity theft, right? So Japheth is also having his identity stolen here at this particular point, because remember, they've already taken over in Britain. The Rothschilds took over during those Waterloo, right? So they've taken over the British Bank. And so they're warring with the last stronghold of Japheth, which is Russia. So they took over his Celtic identity. They took over his Viking identity. Now they're taking over his Roman identity. Okay? All right? Who were overwhelmingly ethnic Swedes. Swedish are known to be very blonde hair, blue eyes, very slanted Canaanites, probably. From Denmark and Norway between the 9th and 11th century, Varangians ruled the medieval state of Kievan Rus, settled among many territories of modern Belarus, that's Ukrainians, Russia and the Ukraine, and formed the Byzantine Varangian Guard, which later also included the Anglo-Saxons. So you see, they took over the identity. They took over even the Byzantinian identity, the Rus identity, the Viking identity, the Celtic identity, the Ephraimite identity, the Ivanov identity. So he took over, Esau's identity, took over the 10 tribes identity and Japheth's identity. Okay? A group of Varangians known as the Rus settled in Novgorod under the rulership of Rurik. So Norse sagas, that's what they call their stories, sagas. The continuing saga of, remember we used to watch all those miniseries movies when I was young, and they were always called a saga. All right? So, now here's something really interesting, and this is all about the definition of the land of Ham, right? Because what they start doing in these Russian chronicles is they now start redefining all the lands. They call the Western Europe, the land of Japheth. They expand also Ham's land into Africa. So that's what they do. Watch. A lot of Ham, they do their own version of creation and everything, right? In these chronicles, because they're rewriting the book. To the lot of Ham fell the southern region comprising Egypt, Ethiopia towards India. Now, no, they're going to have some accuracies here. Satan mixes truth with a lie. The other two Ethiopia, out of which the red Ethiopian river flows to the eastward, the Thebad, Libya as far as Cyrene, Marmus, Syrtis, and other Libya, Numidia. So there's two Libyas. right? So there's one in the east and one in the west. So they're showing you some stuff here while they're conflating them, okay, and they're mixing. And Mauritania over and against the Cadiz among the regions of the Orient. Han, so Han is Japheth and Canaan, right? Also Cilicia, Lacedonia, Persia, so Persia, right? So remember, Japheth got Persia, the Medo-Persian Empire, Cyrus, right? Kamalia, Lycia, etc., etc. Okay, well, I shouldn't say etc., but and so on and so forth. So, but it says, likewise, he conquered the islands of Sardinia, Crete, and on Cyprus, and the river Gihon called the Nile. The river Gihon is called the Nile. Remember in the lands of Shem, I showed you that that this whole water mass going around the back of the head of the man of Africa was the Gihon River. And then it split here, and because this connects here, it split and goes down that way, down south, and it goes across this way, the Gihon, into Africa. That was what was called the Nile. Not necessarily here, but the Ethiopic Sea was the Ethiopian Ocean was the Nile. Because remember, there's 7 streams in between here from when the land masses were connected. So the Gihon River was also known as the Nile. All right, so what I'm going to do... They're starting to confuse geography, right? Just keep that in mind. They've renamed things, okay? On purpose. Hadrian conspired to hide the land of Israel, and Jerusalem in particular. We're about to go into more of these genealogies, but it's important that I tie the Crimean War into all of this, because the Crimean War is much bigger than it's given credit for being. It's kind of tied into a lot of the wars, like the Civil War, wars going on in Ethiopia, Africa, even South Africa. We see the Romans, the Russians taking in particular side. Okay, family. So I know this seems kind of tedious, but I praise Yah for those of you who are willing to learn and understand this, because this will help you to get a perspective on how everything was shifted and changed. This is not necessarily the most entertaining thing, but it is very interesting how they started changing things. You see that basically the Canaanite fallen angel seed taking over Japheth's line, everybody's line, their territories, and switching all the borders. So these are the Canaanites, these are the Horites who call themselves the Ish people today. These are a lot of different groups of people taking over the identities of Shem, Ham, and Japheth and taking over the world, redrawing boundaries, borders, names of lands, all kinds of things. In summation, that's basically what I just showed you, okay? So it's a pinnacle war in history, but it's very much diminished and called a scrimmage and minimalized to hide this history. So I'm going to give you the Cole's Notes version here, you know, with a bit of propaganda in it, of course. The Crimean War marked a turning point for the Russian Empire. The war weakened the imperial Russian army, drained the treasury, and undermined Russia's influence in Europe. The empire would take decades to recover. Russia's humiliation forced its educated elites to identify its problems and to recognize the need for fundamental reforms. They saw rapid modernization as a sole way to recover the empire's status as a European power. The war thus became a catalyst for reforms of Russia's social institutions, including the abolition of serfdom and overhauls of the justice system, local self-government, education, and military service. But really what this was about was taking down, I think, the Japhethites, the ruling emperors of Japheth, because remember, Russia is Japheth's strongest pure Japheth empire. Even the Midianites were mixed with Shem, right? So even the Persians, the Medo-Persians were mixed with Shem. So this is his strongest empire, because anything west of Russia is Shem's land too. So this was a very significant war. All right, so now we're going to tie it into all this other stuff. We're going to look a little bit at the genealogy again, continuing from what we were just talking about. But we see the transition from Negro to Blanco, right? With the Turkish or the Coptic Christian or Arab identity being taken over by the Khazars, by the fallen angel seed. Okay, so some of these things I'm getting from Tartaria Info. This is a Russian website, so I just want you to see it. We're going to talk about this later. That's going to be the tie-in to South Africa, but I want you to know because I didn't quote it on some of these pages. So, the Crimean War has been viewed numerous times from different points of view, including the conspiratorial ones. Nevertheless, the event is still one of the most mysterious ones in our Russia's nation's history, right? The name itself reveals that it took place in Crimea, stressing that its location was the main battlefield of war. However, we know that some military operations were conducted by the very same belligerents in the Baltic, White and Okhotsk Sea as well. There were also some less known battles, such as bombing of Odessa, that's huge, Tangaram, Sumalan, Speyborg, which left almost no trace in history. Long story short, the Crimean War was a conflict of a much bigger scale than just a single Crimea-related operation. Story about the spelling, you guys. I'm always going to have about 50 of them. So get used to it. I have to work really fast on these, so my apologies in advance. So, anyway, so the Crimean War was the first to be photographed. Okay? Hence, we're going to have to suspect that it's kind of a propaganda story they're telling. It's a narrative, right? So that's why there's so much mystery around it, because it kind of, a lot of it doesn't make sense. And I want you to remember this white swan. Remember in the last video, we talked about the white swan boats, the white swan boats, all right, that the Russians, that people used to go all the way to North America. So this is one of Russia's white swan boats. And look at, they got some Negro soldiers, a lot of mixed kind of people up in there. All right, so we'll continue. The Russian-American relations were not always so bitter and tense as now. During the American Civil War, Russia supported the Union primarily because its main geopolitical enemy at that time was Great Britain, which was sympathetic to the Confederacy. In addition, the US and Russia had enjoyed good relations in the first half of the 19th century, even though they had very different political systems. So now remember, Russia helped finance Americans' dollar, gave Lincoln dollars to finance their American dollar, okay? That was one-to-one value. It was a completely independent banking system, which of course Britain had to try to break, right? And the war, when it begins, it pops off in this place. I'm going to give you the name in a minute. But there's all this bombing from above. It's not, they try to imply that there's all these cannons that shoot out, but this is supposed to have kicked off the war. And I'm showing you this because at the time, we're going to go back to this. A lot of wars were fought around this time with military balloons. They were used by the French, however, during their war in Africa. So that's when they were in Algeria trying to secure Africa. The scramble for Africa had begun. The Austrians also used them in 1849, and it is said the Russians had them at the siege of Sebastopol. That was the image I showed you with the ships in the Crimean War. That was supposed to have kicked off the war, that they just went and bombed all these ships. And it talks about this particular balloon that was used by the French. And then it says the Americans also employed balloons during the Civil War a year later. So remember, we talk about the condition of the bombed out buildings in America. They look like they're like bombed from above. The American war balloons were comparatively small ones, inflated with hydrogen. The hydrogen was manufactured in a way that they describe in there. So here they are inflating these balloons in the American Civil War. Okay, so they can not only look down strategically, but they can drop bombs too. All right, and so we see some brothers and stuff working on some of the equipment for these balloons. And there's a story told of this brother who goes and gets this gunboat. He rescues it, but the strange term, and I showed this in the wars video, Jake and the Civil Wars, and it talks about Robert Smalls, a pilot. Now, since when do you call, there are pilot ships, but you don't call someone a pilot. It just seemed fishy to me, who in May 1862 seized the CSS Planter from Charleston, South Carolina, and delivered her to the United States Navy. Robert Small's daring escape from slavery into the hands of the Union Navy put him on the path to a public. Okay, so we don't know what the narrative truly is, right? And this is how they used to gas them up, is on all of those things that you see, those projections out of all the buildings somehow would gas them up. And supposedly Zeppelin had factories in Russia. And so it talks about how the Russian military in 1863 was present. And you guys, really, when you see these black and white photos, check for Photoshop, because there's a lot of Photoshopping going on. They're just composite photos. And it's easier to do because they're all grainy and black and white. But some of these guys look like brothers. I don't know. It's like kind of a mixed multitude. All right, so that's them present during the Civil War, okay? And again, I'm talking about this because there's this whole, we'll mention it a few times here, but I just want you to be familiar because I talk about it in the last two of my favorite videos, which are the As Above, So Below, the Big Come Up, and the video on the wars, the Jacobite Wars, Civil Wars and everything. So please go and watch them, you guys. Really important videos. So we see in these wars, these burned out buildings, the roof is entirely done in, right? And the brick buildings are on fire. And they, of course, blame it on a black woman, right? But Marie Joseph Angelique. But what we're saying in those videos, that there's so many burned out exploded buildings and stuff like that, that it seems like they were dropping bombs, and clearly they had the technology to do it. And they believed that they had other weapons, other forms of weaponry that would actually melt castles. And this is the consequence of it. This is the rock melting from the weaponry. These castles weren't necessarily built inside of rocks, like conies in a rock. The rock was melted by Yah as a judgment or by weaponry of some sort. Okay, so this is the theory people are putting out there. It could just be a narrative, so take it with a grain of salt. It's not scripture. So here again is another one of these big orphanage buildings or something being burned out, and all these black people running out with their children and everything, and they're being warring and people trying to take people's kids. Look at them running after the children. Right? These white men running after the children, trying to get them. See? So you have to watch Beasts of No Nations, the Come Up. Okay, that goes into a lot of this detail about what these wars were really about. The Civil War, 1812, all of those wars. They are kind of covering up a lot of stuff with them. And so this was some orphanage where they took a lot of the black children, apparently, and the parents came to get them after these civil wars, had to break them out. little more going on than we know. A lot's going on. You know, the KKK origins are not just from, you know, Japheth, for example. They were coming from the fallen angels, and they're coming from Esau Edom, who was originally black, okay? And he's mixed in with everyone else, but he's still got his black players in the game. In Britain in October of 1865 in Pulaski, Albert Pike and Nathan Bedford was chosen or hired by a Rothschild agent, a man by the name of Judah Philip Benjamin, who was also a pedophile, to create the KKK. This is the Rothschilds family, okay? Judah Philip Benjamin was the Secretary of State in war for the Confederacy. It was in Nashville that Albert Pike and other Confederate generals met in 1867 to form a Southern statewide terrorist KKK, expanding the little project they had started 2 years before in Pulaski, Tennessee. He was then given Rothschild money to create it out of the annals of both the Khazarian Mafia in the Knights of the Golden Circle. Okay, both the Khazarian Mafia and, it should say, and the Knights of the Golden Circle. The organization he formed in Nashville designated Pike its chief judiciary officer and its golden dragon for Arkansas. And it was a few months after the end of the Civil War that had began on the 12th of April, 1861. So there was a direct correlation and need to create that for once the war ended, or to bring about the end of the war. Who knows? And then it says also in August 1871, Albert Pike wrote a letter to an Italian Illuminati member by the name of Giuseppe Mazzini, where he predicted World War III. Why? Because Esau lives by the sword. So they plan wars. And so this is just an indicator of where we are right now and the things that are going down right now.
These guys were known to be Jews. Okay? Judah ben Israel was known to be a Jew. Okay? And you see he's mixed race. So, and they were also Eastern European. So this is how Russia ties in.
So the Crimean War was a military conflict fought from 1853 to 1856, in which Russia lost to an alliance of France, the Ottoman Empire, so Taman is one of the sons of Esau, the United Kingdom, and Piedmont, Sardinia. So that's like Spanish Russia-ish, Spanish Italy-ish. The immediate cause of the war involved the rights of Christian minorities in Palestine. So now remember, Russia had a relationship, okay, with the Arabs, because there were so many Arabs who were part of the whole raising up of Russia, because half of them went into one side of Russia, and then the Prester Johns and Christians went into the other side of Russia, and then the Khazars chose Judaism, right? Remember that story from several of my other videos? So there's a few things at play here. The immediate cause of war involved the rights of Christian minorities in Palestine, which was part of the Ottoman Empire. Okay, the Coptic Ethiopians, Orthodox Ethiopians, always had a relationship with Russia and the Byzantines. They look very similar as a people. Okay, and like I said, I think the true Japhethites were black, and they were a mixture. We already talked about how Japheth did marry him with Ham and Jasher. Shows that. The dispute was over sea routes from the Black and Caspian Seas into the Mediterranean. Why? Why were they beginning to dispute? Because the rest of Africa, the rest of Europe, was getting ready to overtake Africa. So these are Russian military. See how many chocolate folks are hanging out there? This one's a bit whitewashed, but excuse me. So here was Russia, here's the Black Sea, and here it leads into the Mediterranean Sea. And then where does that go? It goes into the Nile and down into Africa. So the rest of the Europeans are working on their scramble for Africa. Russia's not dependent on Africa, okay? They were not dependent on Africa. All right, it says the Crimean War, as well as other military clashes near the border of the Russian Empire that happened during the mid-19th century, had quite a tangible underpinning. Their target was currently forgotten, forbidden energy technologies, which continued to exist after some little-known global disaster. The Russian Empire was one of the most affected territories after that disaster. So when they talk about mud floods, the judgments of Yah, or these technologies they were using these balloons and everything. Various nations used this situation for their benefits and sent military formations to Russian territory. I will figuratively call them allied sources. So this is again from that Tartaria site I showed you guys, okay? That Russian site. Or the first international union. So they were a confederate, a union of people confederate against Israel. Even Russia. Russia managed to defend itself from the first union's attack. It was the time when the Crimean War happened. The rest of this war apparently sits well with all sides. So you see them. It's a real mixture kind of people, right? Some of them are looking Arabic and black and Japhetic and so on and so forth. So one of the wars that we already talked about that came up was this war that the Abyssinians had, because one of the things they say about the Crimean War is that this war happened simultaneously at the same time. So what was happening was, here you have these Coptic Christian Russians, and the Ethiopians are also Coptic Christians. They all seem to be a mix of Byzantinians, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, really, with Esau, Edom in there, and Israel in there. Okay? But everything has gone Catholic through Esau and Edom and the Presters. And so Ethiopia is a key strategic point, right? Because it is further down the Nile. Everyone else is scrambling for Africa. They already have a relationship with the Abyssinians. So what do you think they're trying to do? This is like the real Russia. Like this is, the Khazars are taking over Russia, but this is Japheth. Because remember I said he lost Britain. He lost Britain to the fallen angels, the Anglo-Saxons, right? So in 1855, Ethiopia was a country divided with no powerful central authority. This period, which began in 1769, was known in Amharic as Zemeni Mesafint, the age of princes. During this time, Ethiopian emperors were only figureheads ruling in the capacity of Gondar. Numerous noblemen held de facto power, and there was constant warfare among the noblemen over land and the authority to crown the emperor in the capital. Fighting ended when Emperor Tewodros, or Kassa, began a concerted effort to try to unite the country under his rule and end the decentralized Zemeni Mesafint. All right, and it says in 1855, come all the way down here, guys, Kassa defeated the last important ruler of the Zamana Mesafint, Damatkaswebe Haile Mariam of Tigray. 2 days later, Kassa Halu was crowned King of Kings of Ethiopia as Tewodros II at Webe's church by the Coptic metropolitan Abuna Salama. Okay, now he's then started fighting with the Arabs. The Arabs started fighting with him. The Arabs were allied with Britain. Russia already had a relationship with these guys. So they have a place in Africa because they got this relationship. All right, so what happened again in this war? Well, he wasn't getting any support from the British, who were supposed to be Catholics. The British are siding with the Muslim Islamists. Really? Why? Because they're really, what did we say before? The Arabs are the Rothschilds, right? They are the Sassoons or Sarsarians with Esau Edom. So he's thinking, oh, they're Christians like me. They're going to side with me. No way. They want control over that land. And so they wind up killing him because he supposedly holds hostages. You can go back and watch the video on the wars with the White House burning down. It goes more into this, but he writes a letter to Queen Victoria asking for military help. The letter remains unanswered after the lack of response. He's infuriated, and one of this British Council captains returns to Egypt, and it's looking that the British are signing with Egypt. So then he holds Captain Cameron hostage, and then that gives the British an excuse to go after him because it's in the press, right? And they were terribly defeated because they didn't have the automatic weaponry. And so his son was taken, and he, quote, committed suicide. That means they killed him. So you see how this relationship falls apart for Russia, right? In the scramble for Africa. And I'm thinking Russia, this is the fall of Japheth. Now, I just brought up Steve McQueen because he looks a lot like these guys. These guys don't look, I don't know any African Americans who have these kind of features. They have the skin color, but not these features. These guys be looking, you know, not this guy maybe, this guy, but these two. The Ethiopians have a very peculiar look. They look Middle Eastern, they look African. There's some kind of a mix, and I think a lot of them are Black Japheth. Because what does it say? Japheth will dwell in the tents of Shem. Now, this is just my theory. Okay, but it kind of makes sense. Because this is the true Israel. What I always say, the true Israel, Jerusalem could either be at the center of earth, Mount Meru, or it could be the Azores, where Yah will smite the seven streams and where Shinar was, or it's in Ethiopia, like Tanzania, Kenya, Ethiopia, that region. Okay? So I just want you to see the similarity in faces and looks and bone structure. Okay? And so, yeah, family, also the Congo is also Israel. But yeah, so this is, you know, Japheth will dwell in the tents of Shem. And so I believe that Japheth is dwelling there. And notice how they mentioned Tigrayans. And there's always these disputes with Tigrayans that Tewodros was involved with. The original Tewodros, not the guy who calls himself Tewodros today. All right. So there's a lot of kind of complex stuff going on here, family. But you know, it's basically the gist of it is that Russia did have a relationship with Ethiopia, okay, in these times. And this is what is being broken during the Crimean War and the civil wars in the United States and everything. Slightly different kind of a face than you see among African Americans. All right, so the scramble for Africa was 1880 to 1913, and this is why it became significant for them. Many European powers had a well-established presence in Africa, including some with benign sounding terms such as interest or protectorate, but after the Berlin Conference of 1884-85, Africa was carved up and much of the continent were conquered as outright colonies. Even small nations such as Belgium and Portugal had vast African domains, like Belgium, right? Congo. They had Congo. But one notable European empire that had almost no presence in Africa was Russia, which was largely focused on expansion across Asia and to the Far East. Really? They had already been running Khazaria. They were being beaten back and beaten down into communism by the next two wars. But so what we also see in the late 19th century, 1800s, right, is that, however, there is this Italo-Ethiopian war where this guy named Maximov serves as a volunteer with the Ethiopians against the Italians, arrives in Ethiopia as a Red Cross volunteer, and then he, not wanting to see a fellow Orthodox nation being conquered, led Maximov to join one of the feudal hosts raised by the Ethiopian nobility in response to the call from the Emperor Menelik. So this is Menelik here, okay, to resist the Italians. So what we start finding here now is that Russia starts doing these kind of secret wars, okay, where they provide resources. You may just think it's some random dude, Maximov, who's he? It's like, it is seem random, but then you find out he's in many places and he's a war correspondent. So he's doing communications warfare and military warfare. So he's acting as some kind of an emissary and support covertly. And you're going to see the Russians doing this a lot, like through second parties and stuff. Because they're not dependent on Africa as everyone else. They focus on their expansion into the East and, you know, all that kind of stuff. They already had it. Well, yeah, talk about. Anyway, so we come back to this. The corresponding events in South Africa happened later than the Crimean War for sure. So after that war with the Italians, Ethiopians and Italians, right, timeline-wise, we then have events in South Africa that happened later than the Crimean War. Again, this is from Tartaria info. What could unite South Africa and the Russian Empire? It reminds me of an old song about the Transvaal Republic and the Boer War, which took place in South Africa at the end of the 19th century. So there's this folk song all about this that is very popular. See, when you write a song, everybody go and remember it. You can hide as much history as you want, but if somebody got a song, they're going to apparently they're going to remember it, right? So if you look at the whole 19th century and even the first decade of the 20th century, you'll see that it's full of odd military conflicts and weird natural disasters that were happening all over the world, probably except the Antarctic. So this is what we were talking about. Yah's judgment. See, these people don't really know Yah, so they, you know, are Elohim, so they think it's the aliens or the angels. They think that the angels are more powerful than Yah, right? Anyway, at this point, let's dive deeper into the Crimean War, particularly to extent historical evidences. Luckily for us, some digital archives haven't been censored yet, so we have a chance to see. So I showed you guys some of those images of the Crimean War and some of the soldiers and stuff and the towers they struck down. And you can go back and look for some of this stuff. And there's all kinds of weird documentation of the wars and destruction of buildings and stuff that doesn't make sense. And then buildings being left alone and vacant, they say, or cities, but I'm not sure about that because the photos look kind of doctored to me. But anyway, we're going to go to the South African War. So remember what we told you about the Rothschilds, right? The East India Company that they owned. So now what does Russia do in this time of the Boer War in 1899? Remember I said kind of a policy of secret war and support. Not like a deep state, but a shallow state support, okay? They don't really have that many resources to go deep, but they have some resources. It is known that at the beginning of the 20th century, Russian people lived in South Africa in small numbers, okay? It's in Wikipedia. Some of this is from Reddit as well, because you can't find a lot of info unless you go to universities, which I found some. The Second Boer War, or the Second Freedom War, okay, also known as the Anglo-Boer War, okay, was a conflict between the British Empire and two Boer republics, the South African Republic and the Orange Free State, over the empire's influence in southern Africa from 1899 to 1902. So it was all about who gets to rule the Negroes and their land. The shorthand language. And it says that Smuts and Botha attacked and took control of the German Southwest Africa, now Namibia, and next year they took German East Africa. This is significant because during the Boer War, German Kaiser had expressed support for the Boers against the English. And there was sentiment that the Boers were part of the same continental Germanic ethnic heritage as the Germans. Okay, the Boers were part of the same continental Germanic ethnic heritage as the Germans. who were the bitter enemy of the British at the time. So this preamble to World War so-called One. But this was all really World War One, all the Crimean War and the Civil War and all that kind of stuff. But here we see the former Boer fighters like Smuts and Botha fighting against Germans as part of a South African Union. So Russia fought for the Boers again against the Hun and Cain. Hun plus Canaan, Japheth plus Cain equals Khan. Okay, the Huns, Attila the Hun. Tubal Khan, Tubal Cain. All right, that's Japheth mixing in with the Canaanites. All right. So again, this guy, Yevgeny Maximov, shows up in Russia. He's a military correspondent. He's a military guy, journalist, blah, 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 blah. And he's like, the CIA does this. They got a war correspondent. They got a CIA guy, and they got to getting all the information and staging things and doing all kinds of stuff. And, well, he's doing the same thing. Okay? There he is, playing his role, spies. As a result, the Boer cause attracted thousands of volunteers from neutral countries. In other words, can we get in on carving up Africa? If we go against Britain, maybe we could get some of the tenderloin, something. Anyway, so as a result, the Boer cause attracted thousands of volunteers from neutral countries all over the world, including the German Empire, United States, Russia, and even some parts of the British Empire, such as Australia and Ireland. Okay, so these guys are all like, in Russia, the Boers were respected, and therefore the poet Galina wrote a poem, Boer and His Sons. Sounds kind of boring, the name. About the Transvaal in 1899. Transylvania, who are these people? Can you say vampires, Transylvania? Can you say Vlad the Impaler, Transylvania? Then it was transformed into a Russian folk song called Transvaal, Transvaal, my country, you are all burning in flames. Very prophetic. That's what's going to happen. So, but Transvaal's official name was Zuid-Afrikaans Republic. Republic. Hence, Czar. Cut them off from being a people. Cut them off from being a people. The nations have taken counsel against you. They have said, we will cut them off from being a people. Czar. Zarangian. Angels who cut you off. Angel seed that cuts you off. And these are descendants of the Dutch East Indian Company settlers. Okay, families, who owns the East India Company? Rothschilds. So these are their family members. All right. So remember, they set up the Dutch East and West India Company to change east to west and west to east. And this is through their opium trade and various other trades, ending it really in going into the oil market. We already talked about that. So here we have Amorite Kens. We've got these Germans. We've got these Canaanites, Philistines, Amorites, all coming over here to help the Boers. Right? It's kind of complicated, but you see them setting themselves up here. Remember, if you watch my Q video, you'll see these are the same people who have the Cain seed, the Q seed, right? And so what do we find? Who's this pretty lady? This is a Canadian model. You know I live in Canada. She got herself a butterfly on her throat. What does that mean? All right, so there's this Pavel Petrovich family, and apparently this is supposed to be Elon Musk's family, and his father is a white South African of Russian descent from Transvaal. The Muscovites, Elon Muscovite, and this is his Canadian mommy. Okay? Just thought I'd put her in there because she's Canadian. And these are the 70 shepherds. The 10% of the angels who rule the 70 nations, 7 of which are the fallen angel nations, the 7-nation army. I'm gonna run a 7-nation army. I don't know the lyrics, but you know what I'm talking about. 7-nation army, Septimus Severus. Let's cut them off from being a nation. 70 shepherds. Talked about it in the last video. That rule over the Gentiles. Okay? Next, we're going to go into more recent history, including the Battle of Cuerna Valley. But remember, another thing I want to say is that with this Great Reset, what is happening is that, so this is a book written by Charles Schwab, The Great Narrative, and it's all about narratives, stories waged in your mind. So there is the true narrative, which is Yah's narrative, and then there's all the other narratives, which are the ones of the enemy. And so the only way that you can line yourself up to succeed is by lining yourself up with the word. And what the enemy is going to do and has been doing is using these alternative narratives to churn and change the people's minds to move towards the New World Order. But one of the things that they really state is that in this, and I got this from Truth Unedited, that in this New World Order, it will not be a new normal. So the term normal derives from the term Nordic, M for waters or movements of the Aleph. So we were in a European society where the Norse were considered the Alephs, the leaders. Now, because the times of the Gentiles are over, that is no longer happening. So that's what he's saying. A new world, not a new normal, is now emerging, the contours of which will largely be defined by narratives that evolve to inform and construct the way forwards. So there's going to be new narratives to move out of the West being the controlling powers, and of course Africa will lead the world, as I've said. And they're trying to sharpen Israel for their purposes, the same nations that scattered it. And so this is what this agenda is about, that he's written about in the Great Narrative. This is the narrative of the Antichrist. Now remember also that all of the men who started communism in Russia were Jews. And Lenin in particular was a Ukrainian Jew. All right, so keep that in mind, that it's the Hegelian dialectic, two sides playing each other off. Also, other things to remember with the whole communist revolution, that Russia was very careful to provide aid to the blacks in Cuba, also in the Angola crisis. The Angolans were fighting against the South Africans, and Russia also provided military weaponry so they could fight against the South Africans and prohibit them from encroaching into Angola and expanding their right-wing empire. This was all very strategic, and even today Russia is still trying to build relationships, good relationships with Africa, but still there's a larger game at play with the Illuminati, and everybody is sort of a puppet, but we know that Abba Yah is the ultimate puppet master of everything. So just letting you know that those are the ways that Russia has worked with Africa and really is seeking friendship with Africa right now as an equal trading partner. And they don't have the bad spiritual karma necessarily, even though I mentioned there may have been some involvement with the weapons that were given in the Lord's Liberation Army. they're probably the cleanest nation because Yah says he's going to judge every nation that has exploited Israel. And so they're probably the most hands-off, but they still, you know, they got a little bit of dirt on their hands. So let's go into some history. According to the intellectual Alexander Solzhenitsyn, Ukrainian, he said that the blood-maddened Jewish terrorists had murdered 66 million people in Russia from 1918 to 1957. Between the years 1917 and 1991, preceding the collapse of the Soviet Union, it is estimated that the communist Jews murdered somewhere between 60 and 135 million innocent people. So this is what Solzhenitsyn says. The Ukrainians and the Russians and the Khazars all have the same genetics, and the Germans and the Dutch. So these are all the same people. And anyway, after that, Solzhenitsyn begins, when he's released from prison, he pushes towards Russian Orthodoxy and supporting a lot more government things once he's released from prison. So it's kind of interesting once you start to consider that these are not the original, they're mixed in with the Gentile nations, but this seems to be the children of the fallen at this point, especially because Waterloo, as I've said before, and I keep mentioning Waterloo, was when Britain was taken from Japheth. And that was when the Rothschilds took over there. And so then they went to war against Russia, which was the final stronghold of Japheth. So it's interesting to consider. And what we find after the Russians take over, the Khazars take over with communism, what do we find? What's going on? What do we find? According to the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, these are all the populations that are moved out. I told you over 60, what is it, 60 some 100,000 or million or whatever, 66 million people are massacred. This is what is left over. The present population of Dagestan, estimated from 800,000 to a million, is inhabited by 20 to 25 ethnic groups, most important of which include Muslims, Caucasian, Muslims, Mongolian, Caucasian, Muslims, Mongolian. You know, they're talking about Turkey. They mention some Jews. We don't know what kind of Jews these are. They might, Gortsky. Family, look at these faces. They look photoshopped on. Okay, as well as these turbans, these hats. It just looks kind of odd. He looks real. See how dark he is. The guy on the left. I don't know if you guys can see my pointer on YouTube, fam. Let me know if, I hope you can. But anyway, yeah, so the guy on the left, very dark. Okay. Could be East Indian, could be something like that. But you see the racial makeup is really changing here, and its Central Intelligence Agency is documenting it. Caucasian, Mongolian, Caucasian, same people, all of them. Well, G-O-R, it's probably Gar, so probably the Ashkenazi Jews. So where'd all those chocolate folks go? We don't know. Well, we got massacred. Why? Because Israel is going to be cut off from being a people. We will cut you off, right? They got massacred. What is Russia's history with the Pan-African state? Typically, Russia has looked for other nations to join a communist alliance. So we have an article which is not very pro-Jamaican or pro-socialist. But here we have Russia taking part in the politics in the 1970s in Jamaica. And this is why Jamaica is currently a ghetto now, not because of the Russians, but because two parties popped up. There was the PMP, the People's National Party, and the Jamaican Labour Party, which both have their roots in the trade union movement. And then the JLP wound up being supported by the CIA, which is why you have all this guns and drug money and everything going on. What typically America does is it pours drugs and corruption into the nation and arms the gangsters against the revolutionary people. And that's what creates destabilization. So that's what they did in the 1970s, the CIA in America, in opposition to what Russia was trying to do, because what it says here is that the JLP notoriously using CIA money given in response to Cuban overtures to the PNP. By the time of the bloody 1980 election, a situation arose whereby voting for a particular party, depending on where you lived, was mandatory through fear. There's another good article from the University of Illinois on the international reggae, democratic socialism, and the secularization of Rastafarian movement, which is kind of interesting because it really did start as a Hebrew movement. And so this is quite a good article if you want to look it up. But some of the things it talks about is from the 1972 to the 1980s. Interestingly enough, with the Jamaican Labour Party, which I say was, as I said, was financed by the CIA, that was the more conservative one. And then Jamaica's poorer dissident groups embraced the People's National Party with Michael Manley, former Prime Minister of, son of former Prime Minister Norman Manley of Jamaica. And this power movement, this was supported by Russia and Cuba, because Cuba was inviting all of the West Indies into a communist movement. And so Michael Manley, it says here, even adopted the name Joshua and promised the Jamaican people deliverance from oppression. 2 years after winning the election, he formally called Jamaica a democratic socialist country and promised a redistribution of wealth. And of course, that's when the CIA came in with all the drugs and everything. And they're still saying they're having drug wars there. Well, marijuana is legal in Canada, and in California, a lot of places in America are using it for medicine. So, you know, there's still a lot of crime and dissidence in Jamaica. It's manufactured. And so this talks about how this affected the reggae music, because, you know, Bob Marley was one of the first prophets, right? Who is speaking of the prophecy of the people of Babylon and Exodus and movement of Yah's people, right? In the 1970s. And so Manley was trying to bring peace and prosperity to Jamaica. And then the U.S. record companies marketed this as rebel music. And even Bob Marley had a song saying, "Ah, rebel music." So again, this is a movement that was generated by men, by people. So it was not, I believe it was, you know, the beginnings of a revolution by Yah, but it got corrupted by the American government and also by the interference of Russia. So was Russia ever involved with freeing the people of the transatlantic slave trade through communism? And the answer, of course, is yes. And over where? Cuban fighters in Angola's civil war? Yes. So this article talks about the history of although the planters and businessmen of North America and the Caribbean purchased large numbers of slaves, the Portuguese colony of Brazil, with its many plantations and steady demand for unskilled labor, was the destination of choice until the mid-1800s, when it closed its slave trade. So then the many more natives of Angola were shipped in chains to the trade markets of the New World. Now, of course, in the 1880s, European treaties recognized and defined the boundaries of Portugal's colonial claim to Angola Thereafter, the Portuguese began colonizing in earnest, building railroads, cities, seaports, launching a program of westernization to develop the country's economy. Their methods were often brutal. And of course, we know that the Portuguese Jews moved the Portuguese Hebrews. It's complicated, right? The Edomites moved the Israelites to Africa to enslave them, to sell them into slavery, and to disperse them throughout the earth. And so by the 20s, there were labor camps in Angola, coffee and cotton plantations. And then by the time, and there was a military dictatorship that drew a tighter noose around the neck of the Angolans. And then in the 50s, a leftist guerrilla group called the People's Movement for the Liberation of Angola, so this is again, was founded by members of the Portuguese Communist Party with backing by Eastern Bloc countries. So here is the Cuban-Angola War and Russia's participation in the liberation of the Angolan Hebrews. And then a second faction was formed, aided by the United States, and that was the National Front for the Liberation of Angola, aided by the United States. So again, we have, just like in Jamaica, we have the two factions. We have Russia, just like we do over the entire earth. We have Russia versus the US. And by 1961, an anti-colonial war of resistance driven by oppressed workers of coffee and cotton fields had broken out and spread quickly, and then other groups emerged. So this gets a little complicated in here, but the long story short is, after 13 years of bitter fighting, in what became known as the War of Independence, three groups agreed to a cessation of hostilities, and they achieved their independence following a bloodless coup in Portugal that made an end to the nation's involvement in the African colonies. So now, because of their unity in Angola here, then Portugal lost their power. So now we move forwards in time, and there's more interference. And what happens is that South Africa now, with the support of UNITA, so this is again a Western capitalist base agenda, tries to come in and take over Angola, enslave Angola. And this is known as the Angolan Civil War. Of course, they're creating the civil war themselves, divide and conquer. And so this is all played out on the Cold War stage, and it's one of the longest, bloodiest modern day conflicts involving the Soviet Union, Cuba, and other communist parties supported by MPLA, while the United States, unwilling to allow a communist government to stand and eager to protect its petroleum interests, again, money, provided arms and advisors, as well as 32 million to UNITA and the FNLA. So this is now the South African, very racist military. And the CIA even flew tens of thousands of sanitized foreign-made rifles, mortars, small rockets, and military training personnel to Angola. August 1975, prior to the South African invasion of Angola, Fidel Castro ordered the establishment of 4 military missions, centers for revolutionary instruction in Angola, to train the MPLA and FPLA fighters. So to train the socialist, local people-run parties, okay? And so in October, they attempted to repel the South African Boer advance, and the Cuban troops entered into combat with South Africa, in the largest power on the continent, and Zaire, and the richest and best armed of Europe's and the United States African puppet regimes. Castro was familiar with the MPLA since the 50s and 60s when he came to power in Cuba. And he said, either we sit idle and South Africa will take over Angola, or we will make our effort to help. And that was the moment. On November 5th, they sent the first military unit to Angola to fight against South African troops. And they dispatched over the next year 36,000 troops to Angola. Now, as a side note here, Castro codenamed his ambitious plan in Angola, Operation Carlotta, after an Afro-Cuban slave woman who had staged a revolt in Cuba in 1843, years before. There were racial conflicts in Cuba post-revolution, but a lot of people would say that it was much better there racially than America, and which is why the Black Panthers escaped there. Now, it does say that Castro maintained that the Soviet Union never requested a single soldier be sent to Angola. However, the Soviet Union did supply Cuba and the MPLA with a cornucopia of weaponry, including small arms, tanks, rockets, helicopters, and MiG fighter planes. I'm sorry. Anyways, but long story short here, they had a major battle in December 1975, and it eventually became a huge, long, brutal conflict. And of course, there was the whole Vietnam thing was going on with America. It says, meanwhile, the Soviet Union stepped up its delivery of arms and munitions beginning in 75. The Cuban and FAPLA troops, buoyed by massive Soviet military aid, expelled the FNLA, that's the Zairian South African forces, from Angola, and drove the South African army and its united allies from Laduna back to the border of Southwest Africa. And the last unit stronghold in the country fell to the leftist army in March. Now they used fighter planes. There was a lot of bombs dropped. Like it was a full-on war. And quiet reigned briefly as Fidel Castro met with MPLA leader Agostinho Neto to discuss Cuba's withdrawal of its 36,000 troops. And then Angolan and Cuban leaders met in Havana to celebrate their victory. And a few months later, the MPLA officially adopted Marxist leftism. So that's what Russia and Cuba did for the Hebrews in Angola. So there is a history. And of course, although the battle was lost in the West Indies, it was not lost in Angola. So there is a history of this kind of thing taking place. And of course, the Battle of Quinacona Valley was one of the most pivotal battles as well. You can look that one up. I'm not going to go into detail on it. There in Angola in the late 80s. And obviously in this situation, South Africa had tried to take advantage of generated unrest, which is the typical divide and conquer strategy. But hey, man, the Hebrews have awakened. The covering is going off, and Yah is now going to fight for the Hebrews. So this is called how the USSR fell in love with Russia. So I will touch on the Battle of Quinacona Valley here. After colonial empires in Africa collapsed, Moscow did all it could to make African comrades embrace socialism, but the romance didn't last long. So, as I've said before and mentioned before, they were not very supportive during the battle between the Nigerians and the Fulani, the Igbo and the Fulani. Anyway, so during yet another crisis in Angola, we used to transport weapons there via planes and ships. There were tons of it. One Russian military specialist, said while describing how much assistance the USSR provided to Angola's socialist government during the Civil War in the 1970s. It's hard to overestimate how much attention Moscow paid to Angola, according to Sergei Koloman, a former military interpreter who served there 1975 to 1991. Okay, so this was after those battles in Nigeria, okay? 105 generals and admirals, 7,211 officers from the USSR were present in Angola as military advisors. So here's some, interestingly, Ethiopian pro-Soviet soldiers. But remember now, these Ethiopians are way more mixed at this point with Esau Edom. Angola wasn't the only country in Africa embraced by the Soviet Union. From the 1960s to the late 1980s, Moscow sent officers, engineers, and technical specialists to help Africans build or rebuild their infrastructure, welcomed African students in Soviet universities, and spent billions of dollars directly on financial assistance. Not much was paid back. Well, we know because the whole world is living off of Africa. So when you take people's stuff, they don't need to pay you back. You need to pay them back. But anyway, they weren't taking as much as everyone else. And that's for good reason, because Gog and Magog will be set up for the final push to repatriate Israel and for the final invasion, right? After Israel dwells in a city without walls, right? So not much was paid back, as Vladimir Putin noted in October 2019. Russia had canceled $20 billion in African debts to the USSR. So why did the USSR help Africans, and why did it receive so little in return? Well, because we already know why. Because it's a colonizer paradigm that we're speaking within. But of course, as Israel, we're outside of that paradigm. We're in the truth. So Africa started to become a matter of concern for some Russians during the 19th century and the Second Boer War. Now, this is what I've been looking for. Hallelujah. Historian Arina Filatova told Kommersant. The next period of Africa obsession began with the Comintern, excuse me, an international union of communist movement in South Africa, and insisted on creating there an independent Aboriginal republic without explaining precisely what was meant by that. So this is the beginning of their strategies, right, for this time now, because Hasatan knows his time is short. Every nation knows what's really going on. So they have to plan for this beginning of the end time, which is this period of time now. Okay, until 1958 through 1960, though, the USSR didn't pay much attention to Africa and issues of the continent, being too occupied with maintaining its industry and safety, fighting in Europe during the Second World War. Several students from Africa studied in Moscow. Some money was sent to African communists, but really it was a drop in the ocean. Moscow paid little attention to Africa's specifics, for they didn't really know Africa at all. Also, Moscow was independent. They weren't really much of a colonizing nation like America or something, where they're codependent on Africa. They could provide for themselves, because this is the Gentile empire. This is the true Gentile empire. Russia is the center of it. Okay? So they're independent. They're not born dependent like the fallen angels, the Amorites and the Canaanites and all that, who depend on Israel. All right? So they were less dependent anyway, because everyone ultimately depends on Israel. Everything changed in the 1940s and 50s when European powers, mainly UK and France, began to lose control of their former colonies. Now, they weren't really doing it. They pretended to. When new states appearing on the map and left-wing movements were on the rise worldwide, the USSR tried as hard as possible to paint Africa red. They started with the Arab countries in the northern part of the continent, for instance. So this is a reversal, right? Because they were supporting, the Tsar was supporting Catholicism and Christianity, and that would have lined up, remember, with Ethiopia, right? And their agenda during the Crimean War. Should have lined up with Britain, but it didn't, because the Ottomans were lining up with Britain and France. And France, remember, was embroiled in wars in Algeria. So they were taking over Africa. The key was the scramble for Africa. And they wanted to keep Russia out of that, right? So now Russia's siding, at this point, with the Arabs, okay? So they've changed their tune. One of the USSR, so for instance, Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt, 1956 to 70, was one of the USSR's best friends and enjoyed Moscow's support during Arab conflicts with Israel. Egypt was the first African country with which the USSR signed a trade treaty, followed by Tunisia, then Morocco, Ghana, Ethiopia, and Guinea. Okay, this is really strategic. So that's the north, that's the west, that's the southwest, and this is the east, Central Africa, and then of course Guinea. All right, later the USSR showed its enthusiasm for working in sub-Saharan Africa as well. Nikita Khrushchev, Soviet leader in 1953 to 64, used a speech to call for colonial African independence and welcomed the decolonization process. The USSR established especially close ties with the so-called countries of the socialist development model: Guinea, Ghana, Congo Republic, Mali, Ethiopia, Angola, Mozambique, and Benin, okay? And you see all the industry, right? And they actually want to set up a lot of nuclear power plants, which is dangerous for war, right? In prophecy, it talks about how they have to pick up all these bodies and label them after the Great War, when Yahusha comes to rule, because there's nuclear stuff everywhere. Alexei Salinikov, a high-ranking KGB officer, recalled Khrushchev saying, "We are basically selling communism to Africa, but in fact we have to pay the Africans to buy it." Khrushchev meant that most Africans were not ready to embrace communist ideas without serious economic assistance. Everything worked just as Marx predicted. Economy defines politics. The Soviets signed cooperation treaties with 37 African countries and participated in building some 600 enterprises, factories, and plants. Among them, for instance, are the Aswan Dam. Oh my gosh, I didn't know they helped build the Aswan Dam. Crucial for Egypt's agriculture and energy supply. The Kamada hydroelectric dam, which provides most of Angola's electricity plants in Congo and Nigeria, and other major infrastructure projects across the continent. So you see again there this alliance with Ethiopia, because Ethiopia controls the Aswan Dam. So fam, interesting, huh? Interesting. So with this announcement of this debt being forgiven, it must have been for projects like these. But you see how it's these very functional projects, okay? They're functional. They're not roads that go nowhere, that wash out in the rain, that, you know, et cetera, et cetera. Let's keep it moving, okay? So then if they control Ethiopia with the Aswan Dam, they're controlling Egypt, because Egypt is always disputing with Ethiopia over the Aswan Dam. And America is always siding with Egypt. You see where I go on this? Anyway, also the USSR provided many of its African clients with financial credits and sometimes with selfless financial assistance. Later, such generosity would become an object of criticism, as it really didn't help much, as it turned out. So, you know, it's the same old colonialist trick. Them a lie. Them too damn lie. Anyway, so Soviet military advisors participated in African wars unofficially, so trying not to appear to be doing a proxy war to kick off a world war, right? Their work was classified. They played an important role in at least 3 wars, okay? The Angolan Civil War, where the USSR supported the left-wing People's Movement for the Liberation of Angola, so we talked about that one, and the Mozambique Civil War, where Moscow also sided with left-wingers, the Ogaden War between Ethiopia and Somalia, This was a tricky one. Moscow had to choose between two officially pro-socialist states that clashed over the region of Ogaden in East Africa. The Soviets preferred Ethiopia, which forced the Somalis to side with the Americans. Okay, so the Somalians are Edomites, like real Edomites and Ishmaelites, okay? You know, the Ethiopians are kind of a mix of both. In each of these wars, African countries were basically a chessboard where Moscow and Washington supported different parties, and the business was deeply secret. No one sent the Soviet army there, explained Sergei Kolomin. But our advisors and our specialists, paramedics, pilots, all were there. The military help was palpable, and the pro-Soviet side won each of these conflicts. Okay. So they decided now here to set up Soviet African elites from 94 through 91. And then they had over 60,000 Africans studying in the USSR. And a lot of them went to the People's Friendship University in Moscow, named after Patrice Lumumba, the pro-Soviet Congo leader killed in 1960. There were some scandals, but they were generally quite welcoming, so you know there's some control going on there, right? It says, this is what they call smart, right? Most Soviet people were friendly to us. They even invited us to their houses. Some of us even married Soviet women. So when you, guys, I got to just repeat this over and over again, and please, my brothers, share this with your brothers. The woman you marry depends on the land you inherit. Is attached to the land you inherit. Because the woman is the land. The woman is the earth. Heaven is the man. The man is the waters above. The woman is the waters below. Heaven is the man. Heaven's above. The woman is the earth below. So when you marry, when you don't marry of the daughters of Israel, you are now going to inherit another nation. Now during the scattering, that's okay because you were cut off. And also this was the plan for you to take over the entire world. According to Deuteronomy, the nations are divided according to the number of the sons of Israel. So you take over their land that way. But it also means you lose your land. And if they take your woman, they take your land. So that's why I say, and if you look at the pictures of the Ethiopians, like I've said, I believe a lot of them are black Japhethites. So they have the land because they have your women. That's how it works. Don't be silly anymore. Anyway, so they're all celebrating. Oh, we even married. Some of us were even allowed to marry. They should put that there. We were even allowed to marry Soviet women because they're so desperate. Anyway, sorry, I shouldn't make fun, but it's true. Anyway, I mean, who's trying to run after someone other than your own women? But the brothers. I mean, that's just crazy. That's how they used to be. They're not that way anymore. Edward Na from Ghana recalled in an interview with BBC, many of those graduating from the Soviet Institute shaped their country's elites, especially in the fields of medicine and industry. All right. And so then they say it was, but this was too intertwined with ideology. And Russia had too many problems of its own. And then they weakened their attention towards towards Africa. I thought this was a good kind of summary, though, for you guys to take a look at. Darfur and the Sudan are areas that, politically China kind of remains silent on, as well as Russia. The Darfur genocide refers to current mass slaughter and rape of Darfur men, women, and children in western Sudan, and the killings began in 2003 as the first genocide of the 21st century. It's carried out by a group of government-armed, funded Arab militias known as the Janjaweed, which loosely translates as devils on horseback. Now, I don't know a lot about this. I've seen some documentaries on it. I'm by no means an expert on this, but the word was always that the weapons were coming from the Russians and the financing from the Chinese, and a lot of ivory was taken out of these areas and taken to China. So the Sudan is the largest country in Africa. You can see by this map here, and see it's right next door to Israel. And one of the figures moving around there whose influence seems to have died down is Joseph Kony of the Lord's Resistance Army, who's been practicing in more the southern region a lot of violence against men and women and children, and setting up these armies of children and sending them through this extreme trauma and child sex slavery, and forcing children to participate in hostilities was something that Kony was known to have practiced. And now the word is that he's no longer really a threat. He's kind of died down. Well, the typical strategy of any of the conquerors who's ever come into Africa is to cause two groups of people to fight, to overarm one side over the other, to favor one group over the other, and create dissension so the area could be conquered by the West. That's what America typically has done. It practices dollar imperialism where it does that. It doesn't actually go in, but it keeps the nations destabilized so then it can just set up puppet governments and drain the money, as I said before. So, but they now say that this man is no longer a threat. And like I said, China just does not wish to comment at any time on what's been going on in those regions for political reasons. And because it's so close to, Israel and right near Nigeria, and China has been with Nigeria and the oil industry for a very long time. So the main resource that was discovered in the Sudan was oil. So if we look here, following independence from Britain in 1956, the Sudan became embroiled in two prolonged civil wars. For the remainder of the 20th century, conflicts were rooted in northern economic, political, and social domination of largely non-Muslim, non-Arab Southern Sudanese. So these people are Christians, and the Civil War ended in 1972 but broke out again in 83. There were more than 2 million deaths over 2 decades as the Civil War between North and South reached its peak in the 1990s. The government ignored the reports of rising violence in Darfur. While the Comprehensive Peace Agreement ended in the North-South War in 2005, granting additional political power to South Sudan, it failed to take into account the effects of the war on Darfur. Darfur remained underdeveloped and marginalized at the federal level, lacking infrastructure and development assistance. This neglect, combined with allegations that the government was arming Arab tribesmen to raid non-Arab villages, was cited as the justification for a February 2003 rebel attack on a Sudanese Air Force base in El Fasher, North Darfur. Long and the short of it is, let's come down to China and Russia. Both China and Russia have worked to block many United Nations resolutions in attempts to appease the Sudanese government from its seat in the United Nations Security Council. China has been the Sudan's chief diplomatic ally. China invests heavily in Sudanese oil. The country is China's largest overseas oil provider. So that's been for a very long time. And the Sudan's military is supplied by Chinese-made helicopters, tanks, fighter planes, bombers, rocket launchers, propelled grenades, and machine guns. For decades, Russia and China have maintained a strong economic and politically strategic partnership. The countries oppose UN peacekeeping troops in the Sudan. Russia strongly supports Sudan's territorial integrity and opposes the creation of an independent Darfuri state. Also, Russia is Sudan's strongest investment partner and political ally in Europe. Russia considers Sudan an important global ally in the African continent. So you see how the destabilization has benefited Russia and China there. The 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. For Yah has put in their hearts to fulfill his will, and to agree, and give their kingdom unto the beast, until the words of Yahuwah be fulfilled. the woman which thou sawest in that great city which reigneth over the kings of the earth. So that's Babylon. Revelation 17:12 says, 10 horns you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but will receive 1 hour of authority as kings along with the beast. So what is that 1 hour? How do we measure it? These are the next 10 kings that pop up after Israel is repatriated back to the land. Okay? And they're dwelling in a city without walls comfortably. And it says here, the word of Yahuwah came to me, saying, Son of man, set thy face against Gog and the land of Magog, Ros, so the Russians, prince of Meshach and Tubal, and say to him, Thus saith Yahuwah Sabaoth, Behold, I am against thee, Ros, prince of Meshach and Tubal. I will gather thee and all thine host and horsemen, and all wearing breastplates, with a great multitude, shields and helmets and swords, Persians and Ethiopians and Libyans, all with helmets and shields, Gomer and all belonging to him, the house of Togarmah from the end of the north, all belonging to him, and many nations with him. Okay, so basically, this is who will be among the 10 nations. Now, after this scripture, there's various other people like Tarshish and some other groups who say, have you come to take a spoil? So this is what I mean. There's two sides to this story. So there are Gentiles and there are Shemites and stuff who are all on another side. And I believe probably the Egyptians and the Elamites. All right. And Tarshish, all on the side of Israel. Okay. So this is what I mean. It's like, see, these Ethiopians and Libyans are black, right? So what I'm saying is that, like I said, Satan plays both colors on the chessboard, and so does Yah, but Yah's fixed the game. So don't buy this one-size-fits-all thing that, unthinking people are trying to sell you, because it's just too easy and too simple. And Yah looks at the spirit. Now, the seed is the seed, and the Adamic image is the Adamic image. We're not going to play around with that. Israel is Israel, but nonetheless, there's everybody else. And so he's, Esau is going to look just like Israel too. So it comes down to the spirit. And so notice once again that the different translations, I want you to remember that the King James says to cast out the horn of the Gentiles, which lifted up their horn over the land of Judah to scatter it. That's what these 4 carpenters are coming to do. But this one says these are the very same ones who scattered Judah, the 4 artificers, the 4 secret society masons. Okay? So, and those are the ones I talked about, the Persians, the Assyrians, the Tartarians, the Huns, the Arabs, the Edomites. They all kind of worked together. And of course, part of that was even some of the, the Edomites working through the Ethiopians, and the Ethiopians were also Israel. Israel was mixed into all of these groups, and there was a transition. So, in this translation, it says, these are the horns that scattered Judah and broke Israel in pieces, and none of them lifted up his head. And these are come forth to sharpen them for their hands. Even the 4 horns that the nations that lifted up the horn against the land of Yehudah to scatter it. So these nations who are coming are the enemy. And they're trying to sharpen Israel for their own use, for their own hand. And the scripture says that they will exalt themselves to fulfill the vision, but they shall fail. And so all of this will result in the second Exodus. Let's look at some of the military bases and how they're set up right now currently in Africa to see where the alliances fall against America. Shalom, Jaron.
You can see from all these military bases all over Africa that the horde that took over Western Europe and that came out of Tartaria has already overrun the nation of Israel and is about to do it again. And now there's all this talk of Russia being in South Africa, even though all the Boers are there. Elon Musk is there. He's supposed to be a genuine, original genetic Russian, and they're going to be helping Africa. That's the story they're telling right now.
And we have touchdown. The Russian Swans have come to South Africa. Blackjack, NATO reporting name, officially the Tu-160, Russia's strategic nuclear bombers. This is the furthest south that they have ever been. We're closer to Antarctica than we are to Russia at this point. Now, ordinarily, a nuclear bomber doesn't make the most welcome guest, but this is a symbol of trust between Russia and South Africa. Now, you can love them or you can hate them, but this is a majestic aircraft. The world's heaviest supersonic military aircraft. This thing weighs in at almost 300 tons, capable of staying in the air.
And to say it's a pleasure for us as South African Air Force to receive the Russian Federation Air Force to visit us.
The Russian side has been very, very careful to keep any and all politics out of this visit and its statements. But come on, we can read between the lines. Vladimir Putin is hosting dozens and dozens of African leaders. The world is changing, and Russia's message is clear. It's back in Africa. Old empires die and new powers are born. And for Russia, 21st century, Africa is the place to be.
Here we have the whole story. All right, fam. So that was last year around this time, okay, that I made this video. And so now, just on the 19th and 20th, Putin was in Russia meeting with all the African leaders. And like I said, he forgave these debts. And also there were a lot of African nations from Western leaders. I'm not sure if I should share this with you guys as well, before I go into this next piece here. But that were also, they were meeting with Putin as they are describing and discussing their future with Africa, okay? And they've basically, everybody knows the times of the Gentiles are over, the time of the West is over. And so I'm just wondering if I should show you guys these articles right now before we move on. Maybe I'll just quote them out loud. Russia. So at the Russian parliament headquarters, so basically on the 19th and 20th of March, 40 African delegations traveled to Russia, okay? Traveled to Russia. Sorry, I got that wrong, fam. To meet with Putin, okay? And so they had these discussions, and let me just make sure I get the right slide in front so you guys can see it. And it's in central Moscow at the Russian parliament headquarters, just a few meters from the Kremlin. It was here that the conference, the Russia, Africa in Multipolar World was held from the 19th to the 20th of March. And it was devoted to strengthening cooperation between Africa and Russian parliaments, okay? So Duma Speaker Volodin gave a speech on Russia and Western influences in Africa, all right? It is not Washington that should teach us how to build our friendly relations and plans for the future, he said, defending Russian interests in Africa, which he said had never been mercantile, unlike those of US and European countries. You see the narrative, right? So Putin spoke at the conference between two meetings with Xiao Jinping. Sorry, I was getting that wrong, family, before. Like I said, I'm a little slow right now. He insisted on the need to cooperate with more African countries, right? And then here's a really interesting part, fams. Y'all. So one of the priorities of his foreign policy before announcing the free delivery of grain to the continent. Let me repeat that again. Free delivery of grain to the continent if the food agreement between Russia and Ukraine is not renewed. Well, do you think it's going to be renewed? I don't think so. He also said that African soldiers from 20 countries were currently being trained in Russia. Right? And see, as one of my brothers online, I like to listen to his studies. See, or as the Rastas say, seen. Anyway, yeah, so Russia is the new ally. And they denounced the perpetuation of domination by former colonial powers. All right. Now, this is Burkina Faso. This is West Africa. Also attended the conference. Ousmane Bougoma. Okay. He attended the conference, Burkina Faso, as did the vice president of Chad, Malum Yoboke Deyake Yaraki. Sorry about my pronunciation, fams. I got to learn the African languages. And the president of Guinea. All right. And so then Lavrov addresses the neocolonialism at this conference and event. Okay. And Bourgorma spoke of the creation of bilateral working commission between Russia and Burkina Faso and reiterated his willingness to cooperate with Moscow, saying partnership with Russia is not a short-term phenomenon. It's a long-term choice based on trust. All right, messaging about trust. The Moroccan delegation, led by the first deputy speaker of the House of Representatives, Mohamed Sabari, was also present in Moscow. The countries of the African continent will never support people who have blood on their hands and want to teach us democracy. These countries also colonized the African continent, but unfortunately, we managed to say goodbye to them. All right, and so there was just another little point I glanced at here. They want to avoid neo-colonialist history repeating. And hopefully you can see this, fam. I see on TikTok, it's just kind of blurry and messing up. I hope that's a little better, but I'm reading it out loud. So hopefully, fam, you guys can hear it okay. And my stream, you guys, the stream people, I can't see you right now because that's you right there. So I gotta just finish reading this and I'll be able to check your comments. During their speeches, various speakers criticized at length the actions of the former European colonizers as well as those of the US. It is no secret that the independence of the colonial powers would have granted us was another form of oppression. So they're like, we're done with you. We're done. And then this final thing I wanted to say, for Duma Deputy Chairman Pyotr Olgovich Tolstoy, there are two possible camps. The representatives of several countries told us that they were under pressure from the West not to come here. Okay, so the West still trying to control Africa. All right, and then of course we know that Kamala Harris used the UN Charter to try to say that Putin was under arrest. I guess that's around shooting down the spy plane. So, so yeah, that's kind of the things that happened at the conference. There was another one. As well, I had mentioned about Jamaica becoming part of BRICS and them expanding on this with this, sorry fam, sorry about the slowness, the financing to build the infrastructure, I believe in Jamaica is going to be built with the financing coming from BRICS. So Jamaica about to take off. And when I was there, I could tell you, I saw it. All I heard from Yah was restoration, restoration, restoration. The crickets were singing restoration when I went to sleep. I was like, am I hallucinating? And everywhere I went, it was like everything was renovated. I would see a picture of it. So we want to see what happened. But South Africa better be careful, and it better not be coming with those Canaanitish ways, right? Yeah, Ramaphosa, aware of illegal obligations to Africa. He didn't attend, yeah, so this is in discussion of the BRICS summit, right? But Putin wasn't there. You know, he was getting his gold jewelry from China. He was getting his jewel necklace. Go ahead and watch that on my TikTok. You can see the big jewelry that he got from the necklace he got from China. He got a big old necklace. All right, so let's just continue with this, the symbolism of the swan and family. It's the swan song, and the swan is Hasatan. All right, and so there is a connection with this swan in Russia. This, again, family, I'm always talking about the symbolism because it helps us connect the dots with the scripture, the book that we have that is out of order. Okay, is that order? All right, so, but this is, yeah, you know, Yahusha said this is not for everybody. This is only for he whosoever willish, study to show yourself approved and press in, because the rewards are rich. Yah is good, but he is the greatest above all of this. All right, let's go on. Of Leda and the Swan. So we just saw the Russian Swan ships landing in South Africa, and there's kind of a connection there. And first of all, I want to remind you of the story of Leda and the Swan. So this is, you know, Zeus is the god Zeus, or really Hasatan's, taking on the form of a swan and then seducing or raping Leda to create giant offspring. So that's where the story of Leda and the Swan comes from. And of course, in my Prester John video, I showed you that a Prester John type, Nehemiah Theodoric, so he's using, again, a Jewish name in 775 AD, hundreds of years after the fall of Israel. He reconquers the American empire of Calalus. Calalus was ruled by Sylvanus Totecus, who was a Hamite in America. So now he's conquering Babylon. This is Esau, Edom conquering Babylon. And he was a hereditary ruler of this former Jewish ruled Roman colony. Okay, so this is where the 10 tribes are scattered to in North America, and they were under Toltecus. And now in comes Nehemiah to take over rulership. And this Sylvanus was also known as Ogum or Sylvanus Brabo. But you see with the word Ogum, that's tied to Ogges, so giants. And that's why he was a Toltec, they were giants. And Sylvanus Ogum, he was a great Jewish Roman ruler, okay? So this is now Esau's taken on the identity of the Jews, I'm thinking here. And he was a soldier and ancestor of the Swan Knights. And he also had a fleet of trading vessels known as the ships of Solomon, or swan boats. Now, this isn't the real Solomon. He's sealing the identity. And we know he's a descendant of giants, and that's why he's referring to the swan boats, right? Just like the swan ships landed in South Africa through the Russians. And the ships are shaped like a swan with sails like the wings of a beautiful gliding white swan.
So once again, it's as though Africa is poised in this time for another overwhelming flood of the nations. And the rulers of the world seem to be much more associated with the rulers of the world. The 1%, whatever you want to call it, more so than being free nations right now. So this is another narrative that we're inside of. But Yah is sovereign.
The rising number of foreign military bases in Africa has become very worrying to many on the continent, with 13 foreign countries in 25 out of the 55 African countries having non-military bases.
This is not just the scramble for Africa. This is the war against the true people of Israel. So this is the prophecy of the military defeat of the oppressor, hammer of the earth, and oppressor of Israel. In the context of this prophecy, north, south, east, and west are the four winds that you need to create a whirlwind. And Yah comes like a whirlwind, and there are, in this context, there's another nation that comes like a whirlwind, being used of Yah, okay? Now, the other thing I want to say about this is that the designation of the Babylonian king is not indicated directly by naming him. You have to deduce from reading this who he is by directional bearings. Okay, am I making sense? So four winds. There's a north, south, east, and west wind. And we deduct by who is not cited, the direction that is not cited, who this king of Babylon is. So if we look at this prophecy, looking at Africa and, of course, the center of the earth, former Atlantis, being the place where the Most High resides in Mount Zion, when we read this prophecy, this is how we can begin to read it. What it starts off with is in Daniel 11:40, it says, "And at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind with chariots and with horsemen and with many ships, and he shall enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass over." So that is the king of the north. That would be Russia. Okay, so Russia is prodding this wicked Babylonian king, and that king comes into the lands and starts to pass over them. And once again, the gates of Gibraltar, or the pillars of Hercules, might actually be where this door is. All right, so that may be the door to Africa, the place where this all is pushed at and pushed open. Okay, now also this is considered a gate right here at the Horn of Africa is also considered a gate to the frontal lobe, okay? And we know military bases like Djibouti are right around there. So is Ethiopia. You know, it's like toss up between Ethiopia and Congo. Sometimes South Africa, you know, everybody's moving all over. Where's Jerusalem? Anyway, let's keep it moving. All right. So this is the story of him, of the West entering into the land and then being warred with by the king of the South and by the king of the North. And we're going to see the East as well. The two-leaved gates. Now, of course, it is the people themselves who are the doors and the gates. But I just want you to consider that and consider perhaps, maybe, that there is and Eden, Mount Zion at the center of the earth. So this is a picture of this rogue king pushing at Russia, all right, provoking Russia. Now, of course, Russia is clearing the Ukrainians out of the land of Shem, so they're not out of order in that respect, based on the designations of the land. And at that time shall the king of the south now push at this rogue king. Okay, so that's like Ethiopia, Egypt, South Africa. Looks like it might be shaping up that way. So he shall push at him, the king of the south. And the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots and horsemen, and with many ships. And he shall enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass over. So he's going to go into many lands, but I'm thinking he's going to go into the land that everyone's contending over right now, Africa. And so I don't think this is the full-on Antichrist. I think this is the king of Babylon, possibly, because it says he'll come to his, what happens in the end, right? It's not the coming of Yahusha. It's something else that is happening to cause him to come to an end. That's why I think this he they're talking about is the king of Babylon, a kind of Antichrist. And he shall enter also into the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape out of his hand, even Edom and Moab, the descendants of Lot and Jordan, and the chief of the children of Ammon. He shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. But he shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt. And the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall be at his steps. So this king already has power over the whole earth, and in this war, he'll have the power of Egypt and the Ethiopians on his side. Okay, he'll have the Ethiopians and Egypt on his side. That's why I say there's also South Africa, and there's other nations that could come against him from the south. So, as I've said before, I did this teaching before, and I had got it from one of my teachers, Prince Israel, based on the land that is called Israel right now. But like I said, I'm reapplying this prophecy here in this context. So, at the next stage here it says, but tidings out of the east, that is India, Iran, and China, and out of the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go forth with a great fury to destroy and utterly make away many. Okay, so it seems like he's just on a rampage now because he's actually at war with all of these carpenters. And this part is really curious. So it says, and he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas in the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. So this is a really curious scripture. So obviously, you know, this is the story of his defeat. So he's going to be left in a place where he has no help, and he's going to realize that kingdom is over. But where does he plant his tabernacle? Where has he planted his tabernacle? In the glorious holy mountain. His palace is between the seas in the glorious holy mountain. So Enoch 24:11 says, and I went from there to another place and saw a mountain of fire flashing both by day and night, and I proceeded towards it and perceived 7 splendid mountains, which were all different from each other. Their stones were brilliant and beautiful. all were brilliant and splendid to behold, and beautiful was the surface. 3 mountains were towards the east, strengthened by being placed one upon another, and the 3 were towards the south, strengthened in a similar way, and there were likewise deep valleys which did not approach each other, and the 7th mountain was in the midst of them. And he answered to me, saying, That mountain which you behold, the extent of whose head resembles the seat of the Lord, will be the seat on which shall sit the holy and great Elohim of glory, everlasting King, when he shall come and descend to visit the earth with goodness. So this is where Mount Zion is. Remember, this is just my theory. This is not an absolute Rhema word. I've talked about this before. I've said that in Isaiah 11:15, Yahuwah will smite the 7 streams at the time of the second Exodus, right? He'll make desolate the sea of Egypt. He shall lay his hand on the river with a strong wind, and he shall smite the 7 channels, so that men shall pass through it dry shod, and there shall be a passage for my people that is left in Egypt, and it shall be to Israel as the day when he came forth out of the land of Egypt. So this is the second Exodus, and this is where, in the midst of the seas, where this rogue king tries to plant his tabernacle, right? And I will make desolate the mountains and hills, and will dry up the grass, and I will make the rivers and islands dry up the pools, and I will bring the blind by a way that they knew not, and I will cause them to tread paths which they have not known, and I will turn darkness into light for them, and crooked things into straight. These things will I do, and will not forsake them. If you pass through the water, I am with thee, and the rivers shall not overflow thee. And if thou go through the fire, thou shalt not be burned. The flame shall not burn thee. I am thy Elohim. I am Yahuwah thy Elohim, the Holy One of Israel, that saves thee. I have made Egypt and Ethiopia thy ransom. So they're going to be ransom. That's why they're fighting with that king, whose direction we haven't gotten an indication of yet, and given the Sabians for thee. Since thou becamest precious in my sight, thou hast become glorious, and I have loved thee, and I will give men for thee, and princes for thy life. Fear not, for I am with thee. I will bring thy seed from the east, and gather thee from the west. And I will say to the north, Bring, and to the south, Keep not back. Bring my sons from the land afar off, and my daughters from the ends of the earth, even all who are called by my name. For I have prepared him for my glory, and I have formed him and have made him. So these secret things belong to Yahuwah, our Elohim, but the things that are revealed belong to us and to our children forever, to do all the words of Torah, of the law. So hallelujah. So that is the revelation, potentially, if this theory is correct. All right. When we look at these directional indicators of north, south, east, and west, we see that the king of the north is coming from the north, that there is an African king coming from the south, and it doesn't seem like it's Ethiopia or Egypt. And then from the so-called east, well, it'd have to be the east if it's India coming, and China, all right, are coming from the east. So the one direction we are missing is in this whirlwind, because it takes 4 winds to create a whirlwind. What is the final direction we are missing? So you answered correctly. Yes, it is the west. The west is not mentioned. So he is the king of the west. He is the king of Babylon. He is the king of Egypt. And that is Amorite-ka. Now, I believe the two-leaved gates are the gates of Gibraltar, and that possibly Eden is sitting there at the mouth of those gates. And that's a place in the midst of the sea. And of course, the army coming from the north always indicates judgment. The north wind often indicates judgment. For anybody who's out there, no matter what your ethnic background is, all you have to do is join the house of Israel. And it's for Yahudi first, and then for the Gentile. All right, and if you are Jewish or you're a Gentile and you thought you were Israel, and you thought you were the people of the promise, yes, you are, because it was given to you to make this choice in this time to receive Yahusha HaMashiach, so that you can have the blood on your doorpost, so that death may pass over you in this time of trial and you can enter into the promised land. And so Baruch atah, may Yah Baruch you and keep you and cause his face to shine on you. May he be gracious, lift his countenance, and give you peace. Kumah Yahuwah, Rev Ot Yasharel. Kumah Yahuwah, return, O Yahuwah, to the countless thousands of Yasharel, in the name of Yahusha HaMashiach.
Suba Aleph Yasharel Yahuwah. And may the Ruach HaKodesh lead you into all truth and show you things to come.
And giving thanks and praises for the many blessings I receive from his favor. The word is the most high of creation.
All right, fam, I'm going to turn the camera around. Thank you. I'm going to turn the camera on. It's pretty dark in here right now, but I'm going to turn the camera around for the TikTokies. And Jaron, thank you so much. Our hosts, we have Jaron on TikTok, and we have and sorry, Jaron, I kept looking at you wanting to say hi, but I'm feeling kind of overwhelmed. So Gwendolyn, thank you also for hosting. Those are our hosts, our people who say hello and greet you with the holy love of Yahuwah. I really appreciate them, because everyone needs someone to welcome them. Shalom, Kemetic Hebrew. So let me just turn this camera around, fam. I always forget how to do it because it's such a silly place. Like, it doesn't even make any sense. But anyway, thank you so much, Jaron. So wonderful to see you. And can you guys see me over on YouTube? Sorry, it's just a little more work to get TikTok. All right, so you guys can see me. Shalom, family. Shalom, shalom. So I would invite people into the chat, but I really want to talk about this some more. The video is a bit out of order because we haven't fully gone through the Africa series. So the Southern Kingdom Carpenter. So we still have to do part 2 of that. There was a part 2 to both Japheth and the African kingdom. And I just kind of touch on China because China's kind of everywhere in a lot of this already. So in other people's stories. But okay, Lisa Smith, you have a question. Family, I'm just gonna, and there are people who can come up and go live if you're able, feel free to. I meant that I'm not sending out an email. Okay. Oh my gosh, family. Thank you for bearing with me. And let me see, Lisa Smith, Sister Rachel, isn't the woman symbolized in Revelation? Oh, that's an old message. Let me scroll down. Scrolling down. Yeah, so certain things people say, in Revelation, it's the woman who gives birth to the son, and Satan stands before her womb to try to catch the child, catch him up and take him away. And then the earth opens up and swallows, right? The nations, the flood of water coming out of Hasatan's mouth. And so that's the woman who gives birth to the son. And I really emphasize the woman in this because you saw her in that picture for the thumbnail. Well, it's not on this thumbnail, but it was for the original video. So if you want to see the original video, look for that thumbnail, that image of the woman with the kind of head wrap, the headdress on. All right. Puchna Baruch. You guys have a beautiful Shabbat to anybody who's leaving. And thank you again, everybody, for attending and having this discussion. I know TikTok is talky, so TikTok's going to go want to talk. Let me just see. Stan said fastly with, had the nation changed their gods, which are not gods, but my people have changed their glory for that which doth not profit. I don't trust any of these people. Yah said we only have him. That's right, fam. That's right. Hallelujah. Thank you for that, notorious Hebrew. That is absolutely true. Oh, thank you, Lorraine Owens. I really am so grateful to share this with you guys. Last year, I just, put the spirit on me to do all these videos. It was like the Ruach was on me. But after that, I got so burnt out. The spirit was on me, but then other stuff happened. So I was sent through a trial. So I'm so grateful that I can share this with you guys again. And isn't it exciting what's going on? A lot of people theorize that South America is Atlantis, or that America was Atlantis, or that there was a piece of land actually there at the gate of Gibraltar, which was, so not entirely sure which one was Atlantis, but we know it was that in that direction, right? And also, please, family, for those of you who aren't used to my channel, I talk about the mud floods and disasters in the great cities and stuff because they did hide the West. They buried all the pyramids. The scripture says, as I said, it was something I noticed just reading through the texts. And it says that, excuse me, pardon me for yawning. I'm so sorry. It says that Egypt was banished from their land. So there's a few things I look at with that. I look at the Mexicans down south, and then I look at all the East Indians in India. Because apparently that's the land of Shem that they're in. So they have such a huge population of people in such a small piece of land. And you could say, well, it is just so Egyptian over there in India. It's like so, but you could see how the Assyrians or Chaldeans were there. Because, maybe those priests be messing with the Shemitic priests, be messing with all kinds of strange religion and Babylonianism. That's all they did, right? After the mantle was handed to Abraham. So we just don't know. These are things for you to think about. But, when you look at these mud flood and Tartaria videos and all this kind of stuff, if you go and look at them, you will see that, this was really Greece. This was, Babylon. This was where Israel was brought captive. And this is what can cause confusion for, there's a lot of these Negroes here in America now saying we're the indigenous people. Yeah, like Shem was black. Sure. Japheth was black, as I keep saying. But it could also be that you were just the diaspora brought here from 2,700 years ago. Like, that's a long time. Even if they added 1,000 years to the clock, it's still 1,700 years ago. That's long enough for you to, maybe forget, your ancestors to forget. So a lot of things to take into consideration with this family, but I'm just gonna pray that you guys have a beautiful Shabbat. I wanted to go into more, but I think I covered quite a lot. How long have we been on here for? I didn't even check the time, but it's got to be more than 2.5 hours. And I'm just a little bit tired, like I said. So, but I'm definitely gonna come back with more Carpenters, and I'm gonna do prophecy. Okay, because there's a lot of people, I'm listening to people talking about prophecy, and not like I'm the super expert, but the Spirit's going to reveal what the Spirit could just reveal something to, a mom with a baby, who's 20 years old, and we'll just give it to her, right? Just because I study and stuff like that, and I'm a teacher, doesn't mean I'm necessarily going to have the full on revelation, but I have really studied it. And so just to set some things in context, I'll be reviewing the prophecies again. You guys know I do this a lot in order to try and figure out exactly what's going on. And I'm even going to review these Carpenter prophecies, because you just never know, right? Never know. So yeah, tomorrow's another day. Thank you, Lil Street Billy. And I can't really see the names. I see your pictures on there, but I can't see the names until I put on my glasses. I'm like nearsighted. Well, I used to be nearsighted. I'm not, since I'm old. So I need glasses. But yeah, I really appreciate everybody who's been in here watching, been over on YouTube. We just love my faithful, those are the grown folks over there on YouTube. They're super studied up. It's good to go to YouTube sometimes, family, because the people on my channel on YouTube are heavily studied people. And so they'll be able to give you all kinds of scriptures. There's even people come on there and they correct me. Like, there's people who correct me on YouTube and they have on TikTok and they have no idea what they're talking about. But not to say everyone's like that, because there's some wonderful teachers on TikTok. But in terms of a really systematic understanding of a lot of this stuff, there's a lot of people on YouTube who are just solid. So that's a good place to go if you have questions during the lessons, and I can't necessarily see them because I'm doing too many things, like preparing for the Shabbat and washing my floor. That's what I was doing while I was listening to the thing. I had to go help a friend out today, and I couldn't wash my floor, so I had to wash my floor while I was doing the study, and that's one of the reasons why I didn't say, Shalom, Jaron, I saw you in there, and then I didn't see you, and then I would come back and be in here. Anyway, so my apologies for that, but I appreciate you. Thank you again. But yeah, it's like we got to have that, clean the toilet, the bathroom has to be clean, put the dishes in the dish, all that. So I was kind of doing that while I was listening at the same time. So I appreciate your patience with me, family. I'm just a regular person, Yeah, so people are yelling. They're like, clean the toilet. The toilet has to be clean on the Shabbat. Like, come on now. Can't have a dirty toilet on the Shabbat. It's like you don't want the spirit of Yah in your house with the dirty toilet. Even though the spirit's in your house anyway, but not on the Shabbat for sure. You got to have a clean house. So, and I'm not a super neat freak. I like cleanliness, but I'm not a neat freak, but definitely cleanliness. So, family, I'm just going to check your comments here one more time to see if anybody's got anything going on here that I haven't seen. So I'm not neglecting you guys. Yeah, we're all just regular people, fam. We all have to, we do learn a lot from each other, all of these platforms. And then you guys, I don't know if you guys, on YouTube, I'm going to post my TikTok broadcast on the TikTok interrogation of TikTok. The interrogation of TikTok. It was pretty intense today. It was pretty funny. So I did a broadcast on TikTok that I didn't share on YouTube. So I'll post it over on YouTube so you guys can listen to it, because it was pretty interesting. Let me see. We see you on YouTube, bright and clear, Baruch fam. And yeah, Lorraine, I really appreciate you guys. I mean, I'm always just, I love coming on here. Like, I feel like, am I a TikTok? You know what I mean? I like coming on because I like seeing everybody and talking to everybody and seeing your comments. I love teaching, but also I just like, you feel the love, like you feel the warm, the Ruach Kodesh, and the warm, fuzzy love of the Hebrews, the Yalas, the y'all. So I'd like to come on here and see y'all. Yeah, and so definitely the brothers and sisters can help you get answers, family, can help you get answers. But I'm going to say Lila Tov to you guys, Twilight Tov, sleep well, have a beautiful evening. Thank you for watching, and Baruch, may Yah bless you and keep you and cause his face to shine on you. May he be gracious, lift the light of his countenance, YouTube fam, and give you peace. Shalom. Thank you again for watching. Oh, Amarachi, you're on there. How come I just saw you now? Were you on the other channel? The dead people coming. No, I haven't watched Hercules with the Rock. No, I haven't. Send me that, like maybe email me a link or something. But good night, or Lila Tobe family. Oops, I hate spell check. I can't spell anyway, and then you correct my error with more error. It's like too much. Lila Tobe fam. And see, even they put Tobe made too. I mean, I can't deal with it. Anyway, let me see. Yeah, you guys, I gotta be I just am too, like, I had a friend who used to call me Mrs. Magoo. That's me. I'm just a bit of a fuddy-duddy. What am I seeing? Oh, radiant disciple, shalom. Beautiful lady. And Iska, shalom. All of you, so nice to see you. And Maltamir, shalom. Fancy, just saying, Little Street Billy or Wally, just saying shalom and have a good evening, fam. In case there's anyone I missed, I didn't mean to. I appreciate you being here. And we already said shalom to Kemetic Hebrew. Tismea, shalom. Oh, okay. I see. I saw your note there. Yeah, so you're in both places. And Jabo Henry Yashili. Yeah, and thanks to our moderators, especially Brother Jaron. All right, you guys sleep really well and have a beautiful Shabbat. You may see me pop up on TikTok or whatever, but otherwise I'll probably do another teaching of some sort of broadcast on first day after tomorrow. So sleep well, Mishpachah.